Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'll have a hazelnut latte to go, I told the young lady behind the counter. One hazelnut latte coming up, she said to me, smiling at me warmly, as she bustled around efficiently attending to my order with a swiftness that was really rather impressive. I placed the exact amount of change on the counter while the lady handed me my latte in a pale brown plastic cup with a lid on it. I could smell the strong, delicious aromatic aroma of coffee and hazelnut. Ooh, that smelt so good. I was virtually salivating. I was looking so forward to this latte. I was in the middle of shopping for that quintessential perfect dress for my daughter to wear to her best friend's birthday party. She was in our favourite designer boutique that was only 2 shops away from the coffee shop, trying on a selection of dresses, all that were really rather fairy tale-like, with the help of the assistant there, who had encouraged me to get a coffee at the coffee shop. Go on, she had said. I'll help your daughter try on her dresses. When you get back, she'll model the 2 for you that she likes the best. If you're sure. I'm really rather parched. I'd love a coffee. Off with you, then, she'd insisted. I had not needed much encouragement to slip off to buy myself a coffee. I was desperate. Enjoy, said the lady, handing me my latte, then giving her prompt attention to the lady standing behind me in the queue. Thanks a lot, I said, turning around to walk away through the glass doors of the coffee shop, holding my latte in my hand. But I stopped dead in my tracks, almost dropping my latte on the ground. No, it couldn't be. Surely it couldn't be. But there was no doubt in my mind. It was him. My heart thundered in my chest as I tried to avoid his intense gaze. But it was too late. He'd seen me. This was my ex-fiancé, the man I'd evaded for over 12 long years, the man who'd made my life a living hell, the man I'd successfully managed to dodge for so very long. In a trice he was there like my worst nightmare, looming before me like an ominous dark thundercloud that I desperately wanted to escape, but it was now too late. I was cast under its shadow, rather like a deer caught in headlights. His steely hazel eyes met mine. For a second our eyes were locked in a stupefied, stunned stare, as neither of us could actually believe that we had bumped into each other like this, so randomly. It was blazingly obvious that this chance fortuitous encounter had indeed been serendipitous. "Emma," he said, his mouth hanging open like an astonished goldfish, "it's you! It's really you! It's been so long! Too long! I can't believe it!" "Not long enough," I said, walking past him, clutching my latte tightly in my hand. "Please, would you mind? You're blocking my way. I need you to move. Get out of my way, please," I said, trying to manoeuvre myself past him, but he willfully blocked my escape, deliberately sprawling his body as wide as he could against the pathway that ultimately led through the glass doors to my escape onto the street. I had been well and truly cornered, rather like a sheep being pulled into line by a sheepdog, with nowhere to run. Emma, please stop," he said, grabbing my arm and looking earnestly at me in the eyes. Please listen, Emma. I'm not the man I was 12 years ago. I've changed, I promise. Can I just have a moment of your time, please? Every part of me wanted to run away, flee as fast as I possibly could. But there was something so sincere about his fervent tone that caught me completely off guard. A faint glimmer of what had once been between us when we first met all those years ago, when our prodigious relationship had been almost magical. It had been so unprecedented. So I thought at the time, as I was beguiled, bedazzled, completely swept off my feet by Graham McGee. That was until the alcohol had pounced on his life like an unsuspecting predator loitering in our midst, that brought him crashing down, along with everything else in our lives, including me. I had watched in absolute horror the alcohol suck away the spirit of the man that I'd once loved with my whole heart, who had changed so dramatically from a gentle greyhound type of personality to an aggressive pit bull. It had reached a pivotal point where I no longer recognized the once very gentle, kind man in my life who had stolen my heart. I don't think we have anything to say to each other, do you? Look, Emma, please hear me out, he said, gesturing towards a table in the coffee shop. Just a moment of your time, that's all I ask. I'm begging you, please. I've been looking for you for a very long time. I did try to contact you, but you disappeared off the face of the earth. I have no way of contacting you at all. Some things need to be said that were left unsaid. All right, but make it very quick. I can't be long. I told you I'm in a hurry. I have lots of things to do. I walked over to a coffee table rather begrudgingly, taking a seat sitting on the edge of the chair in an uncomfortable, stiff posture that revealed the awkwardness of this meeting. This was the last place I wanted to be in the entire world, sitting opposite to Graham McGee. I fiddled with the lid of my coffee awkwardly, pulling it off, taking a quick sip to calm down my now rising frazzled nerves, appreciating the warmth of the coffee gliding down my throat. Its heat offered me a measure of comfort. Graham's expression seemed profoundly earnest, unfeigned, genuine. I hadn't seen him in 12 long years. He looked different. He had filled out more, put on a little weight. His previously long, thin face was more upholstered. It suited him. He looked healthier, more attractive, handsome even. His black hair was still curly, gloriously thick, with no signs of thinning at all. His jawline square. His Roman nose that I'd always loved was very pronounced, and even his olive skin possessed a healthy glow. "Get on with it if you must," I said. "What do you want to say?" I knew I sounded abrupt, disinterested, detached, rude even, but I wanted to make him fully aware that I had certainly not forgotten that in a drunken rage he had tried to strangle me once. The haunting memories came flooding back of all the tireless abuse that I'd been subjected to in our relationship over and over again, thanks to his excessive drinking binges. Even thinking about those times made me sick to the stomach, quite nauseous, disgusted with myself for putting up with all the nonsense and pathetic excuses as long as I did. "Emma, as I was saying, I'm not the person I once was. I'm clean now. I've been sober for over 5 years. I've tried to find you, as we're expected to contact all the people we've hurt at AA. It's part of the treatment protocol there. We're expected to make peace with those on the receiving end of our drunken wrath. I do need to apologize for the reprehensible, inexcusable things I did in our relationship. I hate myself for my behaviour. I treated you atrociously, with so little respect. You, of all people, didn't deserve any of that." He reached out to touch my arm with his hand. I flinched, pulling it away. "I need to say I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for what I put you through. All that physical abuse, the verbal altercations. That was not me. It was the drink speaking. The real me. You know the real me. It would never hurt a hair on your head." "It's all very convenient to blame the drink, but you were the one who chose to drink, even though it was turning you into a monster. You promised over and over again you would quit. You kept apologizing. Then moments later you were laying into the drink again. Have you forgotten? You tried to kill me once. You strangled me.
If it hadn't been for that glass vase that I thrashed over your head, I might not be here now. Do you realise that?"
Graham looked absolutely mortified. His face clouded like an overcast sky. I could detect the glimmer of shame in his eyes, the flicker of regret, even self-loathing. My words hit him hard, as if I'd slapped him in the face.
"I know," he said solemnly. "I've never forgotten that. Not for a moment. It haunts my worst nightmares. You're right. I was a monster. I can't believe I did that to you. I'm so sorry, and very ashamed. Although I realise sorry will never cut it."
He glanced at the diamond ring on my finger. I could see a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, for opportunities missed due to his drinking.
"Emma, I did love you. I want you to know that. I loved you more than anything in the entire world, and I still do, despite everything. Although I know a lot of time has passed, but I've thought about you every single day, wondering how you were, hoping with all my heart that you were happy."
He paused for a moment, and then said,
"Nice ring, Emma. How long have you been married?"
"About 5 years now."
"I hope he knows he's a very lucky man. I'm very happy for you, Emma. Really I am. I do want you to be happy. Genuinely, I mean that from the bottom of my heart."
"Thanks," I said. "What are you doing in Portland? I wouldn't have expected to stumble into you here, of all places."
"I was transferred from my job in New York to Portland, but I'm not complaining. It's very good to have a change. Do you live around here?"
"No," I said rather too quickly. I certainly had no intention of elaborating or allowing him to know where I lived. The last thing I wanted him to discover is that when I ran away from home all those years ago, I was pregnant with his child, our daughter, who was now over 11 years old, and scarily physically too close for comfort, in the boutique only 2 doors down. This horrifying revelation sent chills down my spine. If Graham had the faintest clue about this, it would never sever the connection between us, as he'd want to get to know his daughter better. I knew that without a doubt. Yet I could never allow that to happen, even if he was now sober. What if he was to fall off the wagon again? I could never put my daughter through all that heartbreak that I had gone through.
"So no means you don't live in Portland, is that right?"
"That's right. I don't live in town."
"Look, I better go now.
I told you I am in a bit of a rush."
"I just need to hear, Emma, that you do forgive me. That will mean the entire world to me, and more. It'll enable me to live my life less riddled with guilt, shame, and self-revulsion that have persecuted me for far too long now. It'll be a weight off my shoulders."
"I did that a long time ago, Graham. Forgive you, I mean. I never ever hated you. I still don't. But I despised what the alcohol did to you. It changed you. If I hadn't forgiven you, it would have eaten away at my own life like a hungry worm eating an apple from the inside out. I would never have been able to move on with my life. But I really, really have forgiven you. I promise you that. Look, I must go." I said this as a waitress approached the table. "Don't get up, Graham. It's been so good to see you. Good luck. I really mean that."
"I'd say the same to you, but you don't need it, clearly. You're as beautiful as ever. It seems that life has treated you well. You deserve to be happy."
"Thanks," I said, flushing. The compliment took me off guard. Graham watched me as I left the coffee shop, dashing past the glass windows, giving him a brisk wave as I did. I noticed his eyes looked sad, so sad that I almost felt sorry for him. But it wasn't my fault that he had sabotaged everything between us. It was exceedingly difficult to remember those good times. It was only the bad memories that came flooding back, like a tsunami of purgatory. I was ever grateful I'd run away when I did, as I'd almost certainly feared for my life. Graham was a belligerent drunk, violent, hot-headed, intemperate, when inebriated or intoxicated by drink, that is. It had germinated so quickly, like a summer seed springing forth through the earth overnight. It was birthed after he failed to receive that quintessential promotion at work,
that he'd put so much hope in. Soon he wrapped himself in a protective cocoon, where he indulged in a menu of melancholia and grim despondency, drowning his bitter disappointment in bottles of red wine, gin, scotch, whiskey, anything with an alcoholic punch. It would seem his doleful desolation spiralled out of control, exasperating wanton outbursts of insolent, explosive, impetuous behaviour that eventually got him fired from his job, after which I became his new punching bag. It was after Graham attempted to strangle me that I was finally brought to my senses, as if a bucket of cold water had been flung over my head. It was the final wake-up call I needed to get away from the ruthless repression of my now soulless life. I knew in that moment I had to leave the relationship, or one day I might never wake up to embrace another day. Up until that moment, I had lied incessantly to myself, choosing to believe Graham when he promised to stop drinking. It was like he was on a hamster's wheel, spinning around and around and around. He could not will himself to get off the slippery slope of his own addiction. To all intensive purposes, drink was his new love, the secret adulterous mistress that had stolen his heart. I had gone to live with my cousin Lucinda in Portland, as I knew Graham would never find me there, because he didn't even know about her. 6 months later I gave birth to a little girl. I chose to call her Bonnie Peterson. I knew that Graham could not afford to find out about his daughter. Bonnie was the one good thing that I'd salvaged from that fragmented relationship. I knew if he got even a fleeting sighting of her, he would correctly establish that she was his daughter. She looked exactly like him, with her bouncy, buoyant black hair, olive complexion, hazel eyes. The similarity was scarily uncanny. I shuddered as I realised that, unbeknownst to him, his daughter was in a boutique 2 doors down. On the face of it, it was so improbable, implausible, even unlikely, that I'd bumped into him so unexpectedly like this, when I'd falsely assumed he was still in New York. I began to dash hurriedly towards the boutique, gripped by an overwhelming, crushing fear that Graham might catch a sighting of Bonnie. I couldn't allow that to happen. Never. I dashed into the boutique. The sales assistant was smiling up at me brightly as I opened the door. The bell jingled as I entered. "Enjoy your coffee?" "Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. I'm so grateful to you for letting me go in and have a coffee." "What's a pleasure. Your daughter can't decide whether to go for the blue dress or the pink. They look drop-dead gorgeous on her. I can't even help her decide. Perhaps if she models them for you, maybe you can help her make that decision." "Mummy," said Bonnie excitedly, bolting out of the changing room fully dressed, holding the 2 dresses in her hands despairingly. "They're both so perfect. I like them in different ways. You decide for me, Mum. Which one should I take? I can't make my mind up." "Bonnie, we haven't got time. We need to go." My daughter's happy expression was vanquished by a look of disappointment. "But, Mum, you promised. You said we had the day together to do girly things, remember?" "Sorry, sweetheart, but something's come up. We really do need to go." "Which one?" asked my daughter. "The blue or the pink?" "Well, I like the blue one, sweetheart. That colour is terribly pretty, especially with your black hair." "But I really like the pink," said Bonnie, looking still undecided about her choice. "I'm still not completely sure, Mum." "I tell you what, take them both, sweetheart." My daughter looked absolutely amazed. Her bright face burst into an ecstatic smile. "I can have both," she said, rushing into my arms to give me a big, affectionate hug. "Thank you, Mum, thank you. You're the best." The shop assistant smiled gleefully, genuinely thrilled that Bonnie was getting 2 dresses. "You won't regret your purchases, madam. You've made a very good choice. They both looked spectacular on your daughter. The style is so feminine, so flattering, so stunning. She looked exactly like a princess." She assured me of this as she folded them, meticulously wrapping them in fine tissue paper, finally placing them in a fancy pink cardboard bag, bearing the distinguished logo of the boutique. We couldn't decide what looked best on her, the pink or the blue. They both looked so amazing. You're a very kind mother to buy her both. "My mother's the best," said Bonnie, smiling up at me. "The best mother in the entire world." I smiled happily as I handed over my credit card, as buying anything for such an appreciative daughter was always such a pleasure.
But thoughts of Graham McGee possibly being around lingered in my mind, causing my anxiety to become heightened. "Let's go, sweetheart," I said, as we both ambled out of the shop, walking speedily towards the parking bay, where my car was parked for an hour's free parking. I kept glancing warily over my shoulders to see if I could see a sighting of Graham anywhere, but he was nowhere to be seen. He was probably still in the coffee shop, I thought, tucking into a blueberry muffin. I sincerely hoped so. I was positively overreacting, worrying about nothing at all, envisaging in my mind's eye that he was still loitering around the area, following me like a stalking coyote. It was a tad unlikely, I thought. Even so, I couldn't suppress the rising level of trepidation in my gut. I didn't want to be seen by him. I opened my purse, pulling out the keys to open the car door, almost trembling as my hands turned the keys in the lock. "Oh, there you are, Emma," said Graham, seemingly almost materialising in the parking bay, as randomly as a sparrowhawk descending on an unsuspecting finch, leading me to suspiciously conclude that he'd been deliberately lying low in the parking bay, waiting for me to return to my car. "I was looking for you everywhere, but you had vanished again." I watched as his eyes glanced from me to my daughter. For a moment he stared at Bonnie, with his mouth hanging open, as if he was staring at something so surreal. He was certain it must be a trick of the light. "And who have we here?" he asked, looking at Bonnie with a big warm smile on his face, his eyes unable to disguise their look of total astonishment. "I'm Bonnie," said my daughter, smiling up at Graham. "Who are you?" "A good friend of your mother's, shall we say? I see you been shopping. Bought anything nice, have we?" "Mummy bought me 2 dresses from the boutique over there. A pink and a blue one. They're the best. I couldn't decide which one to buy. Mum said I could have them both." "You're a lucky lady. How old are you, Bonnie?" "I'm 11.5, almost 12, she said proudly. Graham looked directly in my eyes with a questioning expression, raising one of his brows quizzically. He didn't have to say anything to me. I knew exactly what he was thinking. His hazel eyes were debriefing me, probing, begging me to tell him what he possibly already knew. Is she mine? I could sense he perceived that she must be, as just looking at her was like staring back at his own face in the mirror, although Bonnie did not have his Roman nose. My heart began to thump in my chest. It felt as if hundreds of sparrows were flying around in my stomach in a frantic frenzy. I knew I had to get out of this parking bay as fast as I could, so that Graham McGee would never see me ever again. His silent inquisition had become almost unbearable for me. "Sorry, Graham," I piped, avoiding his intense stare that penetrated my being like a hammer drill. Sorry, I need to go. I'm running awfully late, very late. I've got 101 things I need to do right now." At that moment, Graham didn't know how to react. He stood there speechless, agog, confounded. His olive complexion had grown a pasty white colour, unable to fathom the sight of my daughter Bonnie. It was like it had hit him like a brick to the head, that he might just be her father. I think mentally he was doing the calculations in his head. "Get into the car now, Bonnie," I ordered, using this quintessential opportunity while Graham appeared to be too pixelated and flummoxed to say anything, as if he'd been shocked by a taser, was disorientated, muddle-headed, bemused. He was trying to get his bearings. My daughter seemed surprised by my sharp tone, but dutifully obliged my words, and armed with her large pink cardboard bag containing her dresses, she climbed into the seat next to me. I dived into the car, onto the seat, slamming the door behind me. I put the key in the ignition, my hands trembling, my heart thumping, and I hightailed it out of the free parking lot faster than you could say Jack Robinson. "What's the matter, Mummy?" asked my daughter. "Your face is all pink. Didn't you like that man? I thought he was really rather nice. I'm just in a dreadful hurry, sweetheart. Have you got your seatbelt on?" My daughter indicated to me that she had. Good girl. I picked up speed, driving out of Portland as fast as I reasonably could, finally sighing with relief as we reached the long ribbon of asphalt, surrounded by large embankments lined with cottonwoods, maples, ponderosa pines and Douglas firs. It wouldn't be long before we got home, where we lived in our charming little farmhouse. "You said, Mummy, that today was going to be a girly day, that we were going to make it really special, just the 2 of us." "I know, dear. We'll put a rain check on it for just a couple of days. Then you can choose where we go, I promise you.
Well, I don't care. You brought me 2 dresses today, so I feel like I've had a big treat already. All my friends are going to be so jealous. Good, I'm glad, I said, smiling at my daughter warmly. You deserve a little pampering from time to time. Every girl does, I said, patting her affectionately on the thigh. I looked up in my rear mirror, and I could see a white BMW behind me, picking up speed. I had this horrible feeling that it was Graham. I don't know why, but I just knew that it was him. I immediately put my foot down on the accelerator, speeding down the road as fast as I possibly could. When I finally reached the bend, the BMW was luckily out of sight. I quickly pulled into a clearing away from the road, next to a farmer's dilapidated building. I was hoping we were obscure enough and not visible enough from the road to be seen by the white BMW. I was holding my fingers that this was the case. Bonnie became excited. Are we hiding from someone, Mum? It's the man from the parking lot, isn't it? You don't want him to see us. Is he in the white BMW? Is he following us? I think so. If he sees us, we must run into that wood grove over there and hide. We can't let him see us, understand? It's very important. Very, very important. Bonnie nodded. This is so cool, she said, looking thrilled. I feel like we're in the movies, running away from the very bad man. This is better than going for ice cream, Mum. I breathed a sigh of relief as the white BMW drove past us, but then my heart sank as it backed, as the driver was inspecting the clearing more carefully. I could see the shadowy figure of a man staring out of the driver's side of the window. Oh, my goodness, it was Graham! It was him! Oh, my God, he'd seen us! I felt as if I was being pursued by a dangerous predator. My adrenaline began coursing through my veins at 1,000 miles an hour. I could hear his BMW pulling into the clearing next to my car. I didn't waste a moment of time as me and Bonnie hightailed it as fast as we could into the woodgrove, comprised of tall ponderosa pines with long slender trunks sweeping up into the blue skies. I wish the ground had been smoother, but it was really rather rocky, covered with mosses, lacy ferns, pretty ground covers. But the good thing about it was with such sweeping effusive foliage, there were lots of fabulous places to hide. It wasn't easy to run over a forest floor that was jutting precariously with rocks all over the place. Furthermore, the recent rain showers hadn't helped, as they made the black ground rather spongy under our feet. "He's coming!" I cried to my daughter. "Hide!" We found a huge tree stump lying across the ground, swathed in mosses and masked by high ferns and sweeping foliages. We lowered ourselves behind them. "Shh!" I whispered. "Be very, very quiet. He can't find us." Bonnie looked spirited, ebullient, vibrant, as if this was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her, almost as if she was acting out a part in a movie. Her face was ecstatic. "Emma, this is very, very silly," I heard Graham's raised voice in the woods. "I know you're there, Emma. This behaviour is very juvenile. We need to talk together like adults. We can work things out, surely. I think you have something to tell me that you've kept from me for over 12 long years. Now, I know I've been a monster. I get why you never told me. But things are different now. You know they are. Goodness gracious, please give me a chance. It's not fair to keep this secret from me. I know, Emma. Get it? I know. I know. It's not difficult to work out. You left New York 12 years ago. You've always been a very slender woman, but I do remember that very recently before you left you gained a significant amount of weight around your middle. I never connected the dots. Now it's beginning to make a lot of sense to me." I rose up from behind the tree stump, pulled away the fern, so that Graham could see me clearly. All right, I give up." Graham looked heartily relieved. "I'm sorry, Emma. I know I don't deserve the time of day from you. But I can't. His eyes washed over my daughter, who was standing up next to me, looking at Graham with a big grin on her face, as if it had all been a fabulously exciting game of hide-and-seek. I could see tears glistening on the corner of Graham's eyelashes. Is she? Please tell me." I nodded. "Emma, you see this man we've been running away, playing this fabulous game? Well, I have a surprise for you. We both have a surprise for you. This handsome man standing here is your daddy." "You're my daddy," said Bonnie, looking surprised. "Mummy said I couldn't see you 'cause you're sick." "Your mother was absolutely right. Your daddy was very, very sick, but now I'm much better, so I can get to know you well now. Why don't you give your daddy a nice big hug, Bonnie?"
My heart melted like butter on toasted bread as I saw Graham holding his daughter so tenderly in his arms. He looked like a man that had been given something to live for, as if getting sober had given his life a new purpose, a second chance, a hope for the future, almost as if something quite magnificent had burst forth in his life, like an exquisite rose among the thorns. He lifted up his daughter's chin to look directly into her eyes. "You look just like your grandmother did when she was alive, when she was round about your age. You're the splitting image of her." All of a sudden we heard a thundering sound moving through the woods. Boom, 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 and boom. It was such an intimidating sound, almost as if someone was dropping a huge piece of weighty furniture on the forest floor every single second. The only way I can describe it was as if a sensory revelation blew into my mind like an all-knowing wind, telling me that I needed to hide. It seemed that Graham had exactly the same idea in mind. "Get down," he said. "Behind the trunk," he commanded, his voice expressing a rising panic, urgency, trepidation. We all obeyed. I was grateful that there was a ubiquitous amount of ground cover offering us plenty of coverage as we lowered our bodies to the ground. We all knew that something hectically big was coming towards us, but what, we couldn't even imagine. I was clutching my daughter's hand very tightly. "Mum," she whispered, "I'm scared. I'm scared." I could see her eyes were round, her body trembling. "Shh," I whispered. "Be very, very quiet." Then I heard something. It appeared to be grunting. I peeked over the fallen trunk, through the lacy leaves of the profusive ferns. I could see a dark figure, towering at about 7 foot tall, standing in the woods, its back turned away from us. I knew at once that this was not a bear, as it was so much larger, its shape much more human-like, its dark brown hair finer in texture, rather like that of human hair. Furthermore, I could see the long arms very clearly, dangling on the side of its body, of which were attached the largest hands that I've ever seen. "It's a Bigfoot," I whispered. I began to panic as the Bigfoot began to lift up branches, rustle leaves and foliage, as though looking or searching for something. Then I heard a squirrel shrieking, and then the slamming of its body being blistered against a tree trunk. The creature sat on his haunches, his back facing away from us, to eat the squirrel exceedingly loudly. I heard him chewing, munching the flesh very noisily, along with the occasional belch. It was all rather too close for comfort. All of a sudden I sneezed. I couldn't help myself. I had no way of physically controlling it. It was something I couldn't stop. Graham looked at me with a mortified expression, but indicated for us to stay very still with a finger on his mouth. The Bigfoot looked up, his head swivelling in our direction, looking towards the exact position where we were located. Oh my goodness, he knew where we were hiding. I was absolutely terrified. My heart thumped in my chest. My throat felt dry and scratchy. My hands became wet and clammy. I wasn't sure I had the ability to run away if we were pursued by this apex predator, for my knees were buckling beneath me and felt exactly like jelly. The strength in my body seemed to have been drained away, like the water from a bath. The Bigfoot glided over curiously to where we were hiding. I could see his dark hand pulling back the ferns, almost like a curtain. I will never ever forget the incredulous, baffled, confused expression on the Bigfoot's human-like face as it studied us curiously, crouched down behind the tree trunk. It glanced around the wooded area as if to look for the perpetrator from which we were hiding, obliviously unaware that he was the source of our impending fear. The creature looked puzzled, scratched his head reflectively, spoke to us in words that we did not understand. Yet his tone was reassuring, almost as if he was saying, "You're safe now. There's nothing to hide from. The predator that was stalking you must have gone." The creature then sat down on his sizable firm derriere, on our tree trunk, his back facing away from us, as he continued to munch into the squirrel. I did not discern any unpleasant odours connected to the Bigfoot that is often reported in accounts, although I have to say I could smell the pungent smell of the squirrel meat.
At this point in time, the Bigfoot was so close to us, we could have literally touched him. My daughter tried to touch him with a finger, but Graham pulled away her hand. We could hear his breathing. It sounded exactly like a horse. Graham was indicating for us not to move, but to stay exactly where we were. The Bigfoot, as if remembering his manners, turned around to offer us some of his squirrel. The repugnant, oily flesh dangled yards away from our noses was not a pleasing sight. We shook our heads to say no. The creature continued to eat. He really was a gentleman. We knew in that moment that this creature had no intention whatsoever of harming us, so we climbed out of our hiding places, proceeding to walk away. The creature got up with his squirrel, escorting us out of the forest, as if to say, "I've got your back. Nothing is going to hurt you." He continued to eat his squirrel as he watched us getting into our cars. I glanced at him. I could see the creature had such a human face. The expression in his dark eyes was so protective, so kind, so concerned. I quickly told Graham to follow me home in his car. To cut a long story short, bumping into Graham like that was the best serendipitous thing that could have happened to Bonnie. Meeting her father in a game of hide-and-seek, which she really thought we'd planned for her. Encountering a friendly Bigfoot that offered us some of his squirrel, and receiving 2 dresses was what she describes as the most fantastic, memorable day of her entire life. It was as if this meeting was almost supernaturally orchestrated. Since then, Graham has become like a family friend that visits our home regularly. He and my husband have become best friends. They even go fishing and hunting together. I have welcomed him into our home as an extension of our family, and see him these days as like a brotherly figure. Graham has never returned to alcohol. Bonnie is his entire world. He could not risk losing her. He says he has so much to live for that alcohol has lost its hold over his life. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners.
"Are you sure it's a good idea, honey?" asked my husband. "You know your father has been losing his memory of late. He seems to be forgetting things all the time. Last time we visited him, he called me Erica instead of Eric. Oh, for goodness sake, Eric, get a grip. Stop being so melodramatic. That was just a random slip of the tongue. You know it was. It's not that bad, surely." My husband looked at me intently. "I hate to say this to you, honey, but I do think your father is declining in his mental faculties of late. I know you love him to death, and this is the last thing you want to hear from me. I'm not sure it would be responsible or even wise for us to leave our 7-year-old in his charge under the circumstances." "Oh, don't be so ridiculous. My father's been going on and on about showing Thomas how to make a snowman. He's looking forward to spending time with his grandson. You can't take that away from him. That would be cruel. It would be a kick in the teeth for him, an encumbrance to his loneliness. Since Mum's death 7 years ago, he's been so sad, poor man. Thomas makes him feel alive again. Besides, at such short notice, who would even look after him? I know it would be a bitter pill for him to have to swallow, but we have a duty of care to our son. I'm sure Nancy would be willing to take care of him. Your sister loves Thomas. Look, I know you mean well, but I'm certain that little Thomas will be very safe with his grandfather. Besides, we're only going away for a weekend. What can happen in 2 days? You'll be surprised. A whole lot can happen. An accident can take just a second. I'm not going to sit around listening to such negative, pessimistic talk. I happen to have faith in my father, even if you don't. Thomas, are you ready? We're going to Gramps. I was grateful that I'd already packed the trunk with his suitcase, along with some groceries for my father. I wanted to leave our house as quickly as possible, before my husband persuaded me against taking our son to stay with him. My husband was so good at sowing the seed of doubt in my mind. If I wasn't careful, it might just start to germinate. Come on, let's go, Thomas. I glanced at my husband with a murderous expression on my face, as if to say, "Don't you dare challenge me on this one." I suppose, in truth, the very idea that my father might be in the throes of congenital decline was not something I could easily get my head around. Denial was the perfect way not to confront something that I was refusing to acknowledge. But deep down, a little voice in my gut was whispering to me, "Supposing Eric is right?" I chastised that offensive thought, throttling it in my mind, banishing it like an unwelcome guest that I didn't want to entertain under any circumstances. My husband quickly got the message, reluctantly retreating into his shell like a tortoise, saying nothing. He knew all too well challenging me was not always a good idea, as I did have the propensity of being as stubborn as a mule at times.
"I'm ready, Mum," said Thomas, his eyes shining brightly. "Gramps says we're going to make a big snowman with a carrot for a nose. I'm going to let it wear my scarf and woolly hat so that it doesn't get too cold stuck out in the snow all the time."
"Well, I'm sure your scarf will keep Mr. Snowman very nice and warm."
"Goodbye, Daddy," said Tommy, giving my husband a big hug.
"Goodbye, Thomas. Have a very good time with your grandfather. Make sure you put a button on the snowman for me, will you?"
"I will."
I grabbed Thomas's hand, feeling my husband's eyes pinned on my back. I knew he wasn't all too happy about my taking Thomas to my father's for the weekend, but very thankfully he said nothing. It was a bitterly cold winter's day, with a bracing, unfriendly, whistling wind, as we both so gratefully sank into the leather seats of the marginally warmer Land Rover that was a protective bubble, shielding us snugly against the frigid elements outside that were unrelenting in their determination to keep conditions very icy. Invariably it took a while to get the engine started, as it always does, but sooner or later we were driving down some of the snow-covered roads that had luckily been sprinkled with plenty of salt to make the journey around the area a lot more agreeable in Van Buren County in Michigan. Finally I turned right at a labyrinth of forks in the road, and before long I was driving through a large iron gate marked Quakin Aspen Farmhouse. I drove down the long ribbon of asphalt that defined my father's driveway, although of course it was lined now with snow, towards the large farmhouse where I'd grown up as a young girl, situated on 10 sprawling acres of rolling green countryside that was now so magnificently swathed with carpets of glistening white snow, while the boughs of the red alders, quaking aspen and red maple trees were now draped in scintillating glass-like crystals that caught the light so daintily, making them look like graceful Christmas trees, adorned in twinkling, semi-opaque silvery tinsels. There were hundreds of trees clustered together, like a huge gathering of people at a football stadium. They were especially abundant on the left-hand side of the property, that spread out into a sizable woodgrove, the quintessential home to a thriving deer population. I secretly marvelled at this idyllic winter wonderland that was so exquisitely beautiful. The carpets of snow made everything so quiet, as though the world was vibrantly insulated by a peaceful tranquillity. Nostalgic memories of my young life as a little girl, running through the trees, throwing snowballs with my siblings, flooded in my mind with happy thoughts. I parked my car outside the old farmhouse that had once been so beautiful in its former illustrious days, when my house-proud mother was alive. But since her death everything had declined significantly, as my father had failed to attend to the general maintenance of the property. So it was beginning to fall apart. I'd even tried to send over a carpenter once to help with the general repairs, but my proud father would not accept my offer for help. The poor carpenter had left with his tail between his legs, deprived of a job. At least the structure of this asymmetrical farmhouse, built from wood and stone, was still solid and sound, but a few more years of wilful neglect it would eventually only be good for a bulldozer. It was amazing how the snow-covered roof disguised the full gravity of the problem, and how this ramshackle, tumble-down and shabby house had become of late, with the pale blue window frames now cracking, the roof looking as if it might just manage to remain in one piece for a few more years, if luck was still on my father's side, that is. "Are you ready to see Gramps?" I asked my son, as I parked the car under the open carport outside the house. "Yep, I'm ready." "You'll be a good boy for Mummy, won't you?" "I always am good." I opened the trunk to retrieve my son's suitcase, but decided I'd bring in the groceries to the house later. I opened the front door with my key, calling out my father's name. "Dad! Dad, are you there?" There was no answer. I glanced around the place, groaning in despair. Oh no, it was a complete mess. Newspapers were liberally scattered all over the place, while ashtrays were filled with butts of cigars. The smell of aromatic smoke clung to all the furnishings like a smoggy Scotch guard. There were takeaway boxes of fried chicken, pizza, Chinese takeaways piled high in the living room,
leaving an oily, greasy residue in the air. The piles of cardboard containers piled on top of each other looked like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, ominously as though they might collapse in any given moment. Then there were reminders written on pink scrap paper saying, "Glasses on kitchen counter, glasses on side table, glasses next to bed, glasses on hall table." I smiled to myself because without my father's glasses he would never be able to see his notes in the first place. My poor mother would be turning in her grave by now, if she perceived how he was actually living. I started to gather all the carnage on the floor, piling it into a black bin liner I found lying on the settee, left by my father with his good intentions in mind, that regretfully never turned into fruition. "Dad, are you there? It's only me." "Oh, hello," said my father, coming into the room. He looked a little like a mad professor, with his white hair standing on edge like a hedgehog. He was wearing a tweed jacket 2 sizes too small for him, that he'd worn when he was about 15 years old, boasting that it still fitted him today, but in truth he could barely close the buttons on the thing. It was so short on him it scarcely even reached his waist. I was trying to suppress my laughter as he looked utterly ridiculous, rather like an older man wearing a kid's blazer. I mean, seriously, did he even have an inkling of how absurd he looked? Worse still, the matching trouser pants fell at least 5 inches above his ankle. "This is a lovely surprise. Nice to see you, dear. Now I'm looking for my spectacles. I don't know where on earth they are." "Dad, you're wearing your spectacles." My father lifted his hands clumsily to his face with a rather bemused expression. Oh dear, I must be losing my mind. I was wearing them all the time. Fancy that. I've been looking for them absolutely everywhere. Turned the entire place topsy-turvy upside down, just trying to locate them. "Gramps! Gramps!" cried Thomas in delight, running exuberantly towards his grandfather and grabbing him around his legs like an adoring dog. "How you doing, son?" said my grandfather affectionately, his crinkled face breaking out into a warm, sunny smile that reached his pale, arctic blue eyes. He ran his weathered, pigmented hands through my son's buoyant brown curls. "Are we going to make a snowman, like you promised, Gramps?" said my son. "Of course we're going to make a snowman. Just like I promised. We're going to make a very handsome snowman indeed." "Dad, are you sure you're all right? You sure you can manage looking after Thomas? You seem, well, a little confused, muddled even. I'm worried about you. Is your memory giving you problems, failing you perhaps? Now I want you to be very straight with me. I don't want to leave Thomas in your charge if you're having any difficulties in that regard." "Now, don't you worry your pretty little head, Michelle, about a single thing. I'm doing just fine. Couldn't be better as it happens. I'm looking so forward to spending time with Thomas here. We're going to have a lot of fun while you're away, eating all that naughty pizza, making snowman, playing snakes and ladders, spending quality time together. Isn't that right, Thomas? We're going to have lots of fun." "Yippee!" said Thomas. "Yippee! We're going to have fun! We're going to make a snowman!" "If you're sure, Dad, you really think you can manage with Thomas? I am worried about you. You're living in a squalid mess. I hate to say it, but you are. You're eating nothing but takeaways. It can't be healthy for you at your age. I notice your fridge is virtually devoid of anything healthy. Now, I don't want to lecture you, but that's very bad. I brought you some groceries, fruit, stuff like that. You really must start taking care of yourself, Dad. I really wish you'd move into our cottage. You'll still have your independence, but we could keep a beady eye on you there. I worry about you living here on your own." "Michelle, you're just like your mother, fussing too much about everything. I assure you I am not losing my marbles, nor am I going senile. I'm perfectly happy here. Now please stop worrying your cotton socks over me. I'm big and ugly enough to look after myself. Now you go and enjoy your holiday weekend away with that handsome husband of yours. Goodness gracious, you deserve a break, the two of you. If the truth be told, Thomas and I cannot wait for you to leave us alone so we can get on with having a good time. Isn't that right, Thomas?" Thomas nodded. "Go, Mummy, go!" I kissed my father reluctantly on the cheek, not feeling totally inveigled by my father's unwavering conviction that he was indeed capable of looking after my son. I'd never seen him look so befuddled before. I secretly suspected he was beginning to forget things, become increasingly vague, ever so slightly disorientated. But I dutifully convinced myself that he was still compos mentos. Besides, I hardly wanted to drag my son away from his adoring grandfather. I could not imagine how disappointed he would be if he didn't get to build that quintessential snowman he'd been dreaming about building for weeks now. He had eagerly designated spending some quality time with Thomas. That being the case, it was with a degree of trepidation, a rising level of angst, along with a few waves of unease, that I left that farmhouse with an instinctive feeling that leaving my son in his unscrupulous charge was possibly not the most prudent decision I'd ever made in my life. Nevertheless, I pushed those vacillating, tentative, irresolute feelings aside, telling myself to have a little faith in my father. But a nagging feeling of ambivalence began to pester me, like a frenzied fly. I wanted badly to swat it. I felt annoyed with my husband, that the seed of doubt had indeed germinated. This is my father's account, in his own words. Good. She'd finally gone, I thought to myself, as I watched Michelle leaving the house through the windows in the living room. Don't get me wrong. I loved my daughter, but she could be quite intrusive in my life, putting her nose in where it wasn't wanted. I'd seen the exasperated looks on her face as she'd piled my takeaway boxes in the bin liner, a look that her mother had often worn when she was alive. I know I was a bit untidy, but I lived in organised chaos, still do, in a manageable mess. I wasn't fond of cleaning in any shape or form, so I did the bare minimum. Of course, if my wife were alive, she would be having kittens, as her feminine influences in my life have all been eroded, like the roughened rocks made smooth by a thunderous waterfall. Now it seems I've turned the house into a bit of a man cave, as instead of pretty vases of flowers dotted around the place, as in former times, there are screwdrivers, cans of paint, car cleaning products, insect repellents, tape measures and stuff like that strewn around. So there you are. But on the domestic front, I didn't see any point in cooking meals for one, so I've always ordered takeaways. I know it's not healthy, but it was more convenient for me, less expensive, leaving behind so much less cleaning for me to have to do, which is a huge bonus. Yet despite everything, I knew Michelle was right. I was becoming increasingly forgetful. This was a shameful secret I didn't want to divulge to anyone. I think I even buried it away from myself, like a squirrel stashing away its acorns for the winter. I didn't want to burden my daughter with my problems. She had enough on her plate anyway, rather than having to worry about an old man. I admit that I've arrived at the supermarket from time to time, completely forgetting why I was even there, wandering around in a mindless stupor, trying to remember what was on my shopping list, failing abysmally in recalling exactly what it was I needed, returning home with nothing that I required. Sometimes at church I forgot people's names, even though they would be on the tip of my tongue. There were occasions I was so vague that I even forgot to eat. Other times I ordered takeaways twice, forgetting that I'd previously ordered only moments before. I would end up ordering twice as much food. The delivery man told me once that it would be a lot easier if I made one large order, so he wouldn't need to keep making unnecessary trips backwards and forwards to the farmhouse. I, of course, profusely apologised for my error of judgment, but it was, of course, due to my increased forgetfulness. Gramps, are we going to make a snowman like you promised? All in good time, little Thomas. Why don't I make us a nice fire in the lounge so we can get lovely and cosy first? We can have some hot chocolate with some Boston cream pie, play snakes and ladders, and then later we'll make your snowman. Yippee! I love Boston cream pie, Gramps. Before long I was preparing a cosy fire in the hearth. My living room was ablaze with the crackling sounds of the flames, spitting, whooshing and sizzling. I proceeded to fill 2 large mugs with steaming hot chocolate. Boston pie, Gramps! You said we were going to have Boston pie. I rifled through the contents of my fridge. Sorry, son. I thought I bought some Boston pie.
I think I must have forgotten to get it." My grandchild looked very disappointed, but a few marshmallows later, sprinkled generously on top of his hot chocolate, seemed to appease him greatly. It was later in the afternoon when we both ventured out to make our snowman. Oh, it was a perfect afternoon, so crisp, so vibrantly bright, the air so fresh, so invigorating, the snow thick, luxurious, yet lovely and wet. I began to teach my delighted grandson the art of packing, rolling, cementing, smoothing down the snow into 3 rounded balls, which we piled on top of each other to make our wonderful snowman. We then put 2 pieces of coal in for the eyes, a carrot for the nose, jelly beans for the mouth, while we put 3 coals down its middle section for its buttons, giving it a couple of twigs for the snowman's arms. I watched in delight as my exuberant, excitable grandson wrapped his warm scarf around the snowman's neck, while placing the woolly hat on his head.
Gramps, the snowman is so cool. I'm going to call him Mr. Coalbean. He's got coal for his buttons, jelly beans for his mouth. Don't you think Coalbean's a good name?
It's a very nice name, Thomas. You stay there like a good boy. I'll be back in a jiffy. I'm going inside to get some coloured spray for its cheeks, and I'll get my camera so we can send your mother a picture of Mr. Coalbean. I walked into the house. My mind went completely blank. What was I supposed to be doing, I wondered. I hated it when my memory went flying out of the window like a hot air balloon. I tried desperately to catch the string so that I could retrieve the thought, but it wilfully evaded me, floating away into the ether until it was out of sight. I knew I was supposed to be doing something rather significant. That irking thought itched my mind, rather like a frustrating mosquito bite that I wanted to scratch, but it had eluded me. I couldn't remember what on earth it was that I was supposed to be doing. I stood there for a moment, like a solid stone statue, trying to gather my thoughts together, like a bunch of balloons, winnowing through them selectively, so that I could get an inkling about what it was that I needed to do. In a trice it came to me, like a revelatory bright light. Of course, I needed to lock the doors of the house. That's what I needed to do. I felt frustrated that I was having these bouts of amnesia that appeared to be getting worse every day. It really was a dreadful bother forgetting things like this. It was growing dark outside, so I quickly drew all the curtains, bolting the front door, along with the back door, as you could never, ever be too careful. I was vigilant about my security, as getting on in years possibly meant I was becoming increasingly vulnerable. I would not need to order a takeaway this evening. I must have done a big shop, for I perceived there was a lot of food in my refrigerator all of a sudden. I had no recollection of buying any of those groceries, which was exceedingly troubling. Was I planning to go on some kind of a health kick, I wondered? I could not recall the last time I'd ever brought so much fruit. I realised the fire needed restocking with wood, so I piled it generously as it crackled away very happily in the hearth. I switched on the television, flickering on to the different stations, until I settled onto the ice hockey. I think it was the Chicago Blackhawks playing against the Boston Bruins, if my memory serves me well. Professedly, my hearing was not as it used to be, so I swiftly turned up the volume on high to enjoy the game, something that had always exceedingly annoyed my late wife, who tirelessly complained that I was going deaf. By all accounts, I began to drift off to sleep. My eyes started to close like the shutters on a window. I assume I slowly and surely nodded off to La La Land. This was Thomas's account. I was 7 years old when my grandfather fortuitously locked me out of his farmhouse. There are not many things about being 7 years old that I remember, but this is an event that is indelibly marked on my memory, as it had a profound impact on my entire life. Why was my grandfather vacillating, I wondered? He told me he would be 2 ticks, but he must be still pottering around in the house, looking for the spray paint for the cheeks. I knew he could be quite scatterbrained and dithery, as he never remembered wherever he put things. I also thought he dressed funny,
The jacket he was wearing today was so tiny on him, it made him look really rather silly, but I daren't say anything. I glanced towards the house, casually observing that my grandfather had drawn all the curtains, which seemed in itself rather odd. I decided to see why he was procrastinating, but discovered to my horror that he'd locked and bolted all the doors behind him. I was very upset, as I judiciously perceived that my grandfather had forgotten all about me. I needed him to know I was locked outside. I strove tirelessly to bang at the doors as loudly as I possibly could, desperately trying to get my grandfather's attention. I called out his name at the top of my lungs. "Gramps! Gramps! Gramps! It's me! You've locked me out!" I even rang the doorbell thousands of times. It was to no avail. My grandfather did not respond. "Gramps! Gramps!" I could hear his television blaring away so loudly, drowning out all the background sounds. I knew he was in the living room warming a chair, possibly having drifted off to sleep to take a quick nap. Why, oh why, had he forgotten about me? Furthermore, he'd forgotten about poor Mr. Colbean's cheeks. The winter temperatures had dropped significantly, as the lingering effulgence across the horizon slowly dimmed. The icy chill penetrated my clothes, robbing me of my core warmth. I was so freezing cold that even my outer garments, including my waterproofed anorak, were unable to shield me from these benumbing conditions. It didn't help that a blustering wind began to howl like a pack of wolves, panelling my clothes vigorously with a biting infusion of chilly air. The last luminations of light dissipated over the valley, as if it was being sucked away by a monstrous dragon, who was now blowing out inky clouds of black smoke from his nostrils that dappled the horizon in a grim murkiness that became progressively darker and darker and darker with every passing second, so much so that it was saturated in the blackest of black. Thankfully it was made less frightful by the emergence of a half-moon and a pretty scattering of stars. The beautiful trees I admired earlier on in the day had all but lost their wondrous appeal, for they began to swagger like drunken sailors. Their snow-covered boughs jiggled, swayed, bopped up and down, looking hauntingly ominous in the moonlight shadows, making me all too mindful of ghosts, spectral beings, monsters, elves, gnomes, none of which I was desirous to see. I was always frightened of the twilight hours, so I was accustomed to sleeping with a nightlight on. Now I was abandoned, alone, trapped outside my Gramps' farmhouse. I was freezing so much that I felt as if my numb fingers were going to fall off in any given second. Every part of my tiny body was shivering, shaking, trembling, while my teeth were chattering as frenzied tears slipped down my pale, fraught face, freezing like crystallized melted candle wax on my cheeks. Then I saw him, a dark, solitary figure, the silhouette of a tall man, dressed in a very thick, warm, indistinct black coat and hoodie, walking hurriedly through the quaking aspen trees, moving his arms backwards and forwards in a vigorous, bracing, gliding motion, like a focused man with a dogged determination, on a mission with something significant to accomplish. I do remember thinking that based on the graceful way he moved with his torso sweeping up with such an impressively straight deportment, that this man must indeed be very important, for he moved in such a way that demanded great respect. My small fragile body was flooded with relief, almost as if I had beheld a twinkling shaft of sunshine now sifting through the darkness, a glimmer of hope on a cheerless horizon, a winking opportunity, too good to miss. I admit that although young, naive and impressionable, I knew this adult would be able to help me get into my Gramps' house, as older people always knew how to conduct themselves in challenging, precarious situations like this. This was my quintessential, perfect opportunity to get the help I so desperately sought. Unhesitantly, I speedily ran across the snow, my Wellington boots sinking into its sprawling white wilderness, leaving behind a trail of my footprints. I was shouting at the top of my lungs, "Excuse me, sir! Excuse me! Sir! Sir! Excuse me!" The man in the thick black coat stopped for a moment, standing very still. His large, funny-shaped head swiveled around in my direction. I ran towards him as fast as I could, until I was standing only yards away from him. This distinguishable man was poles apart from any of my father's friends. I realized under the light of the moon that basked his sizable form in an ethereal, almost luminescent glow, that he looked unambiguous, enigmatic, somewhat strange. I suspect to the casual observer this curious pilgrim appeared unnaturally large, burly, muscular, super-strong. Ostensibly his fur coat was not actually a fur coat at all, as I'd first initially believed, but was rather like a skin-tight catsuit covered in long flowing black hair. I didn't care that the stranger looked idiosyncratic or strange, for that sort of thing had never bothered me in the slightest. You see, some of the bizarre, friendly creatures in the storybooks my mother read to me were much more real to me than most people I met in my daily life. On the contrary, I felt more comfortable in this anomalous stranger's presence. Never for a moment did I feel uneasy or afraid. On the contrary, I felt really safe, now that I'd found him. The stranger wore a concerned demeanour on his human face that was oddly reassuring to me. "Please, sir," I said, pointing at my farmhouse, "please help me. I can't get back into my house. My grandfather's locked me out." The stranger studied me through his deep-set dark eyes that seemed rather kind. He spoke some strange words to me that I couldn't comprehend. I felt as if he was telling me that everything would be all right. I wondered whether he was German. I could only speak English, I told him. I pointed to my house. "My grandfather's house is over there." I beckoned for the stranger to follow me. Even if he only spoke German, I thought, or some other foreign language, I knew I would be able to demonstrate to him by my actions what my problem actually was. I felt reasonably confident that he would indeed be able to help me. The stranger unhesitantly followed me back to the farmhouse, but he led the way with his fast strides, while I struggled to keep up with him, so he slowed down on my account. I was beginning to warm up as I moved my body vigorously, and the rising heat in my body helped me to feel alive again and very warm. I took the creatures to my grandfather's front door. I pointed to it, exclaiming to him that I couldn't get in. "Look! I can't get in! I can't get in! It's locked! Can you see it's locked?" I demonstrated by pushing up the door handle, up and down, whilst pushing my hands against the door. I tried to explain to him that I couldn't open. "Can you see? It's not opening." The stranger examined the door with his hands. The next thing I knew is that he lifted his feet in a high kicking position, balancing seamlessly on one leg, as he began thumping the weakest points of the door with his feet. He hit the hinges so hard that the screws went flying out of their own connections, and with one hell of a mighty crash, the door came thundering to the ground. I looked at the man in horror, wondering if I was going to get in trouble for getting a stranger to break down my Gramps' door. "I don't know if you should have done that, sir. My grandfather might be very angry." This was my grandfather's account. I woke with a start. The television was blaring loudly, but there was an ear-piercing crashing sound that was so discomposing, I almost jumped out of my skin. I was still submersed in a drug-like sleepiness, like a spider caught up in a silken web, struggling to break free. Someone was breaking down my front door. I was being robbed. I began to panic. My heart pounded thunderously in my chest like a booming drum. My breathing intensified. My throat became dry, parched, cracked. Yet my actions were stifled, suppressed, subdued by my inability to think straight, as obscure random thoughts misfired in my brain like dodgy fireworks. I was so disorientated that my rising trepidation discomposed my ability to think rationally, as all clear thinking had been expunged from me. I felt as if I'd been thumped with a stun gun. I was dithering around the place like a mindless, inebriated drunk that had lost the use of my mental faculties. Whoever was breaking in appeared to be exceedingly determined. I hastily grabbed my walking stick, trudging as fast as I could towards the entrance hall, hit by blasts of icy cold air. The front door was lying flat on the ground, having been kicked off its hinges with a violent force. I stood there like a gormless idiot. My mouth dropped open. My eyes widened with disbelief. I was unable to discern the scene unfolding before my eyes, for standing there in the doorway was Thomas, my grandson. He came running towards me, tears pouring down his face.
In that second, the most horrifying revelation hit me like a brick to the head. I'd only gone and locked my grandson out on a freezing night, when he could potentially have died. What had I done? What had I done?
Sorry, Gramps. I didn't mean for your door to break down, but I couldn't get in. It was cold and it was dark outside. But the kind hairy man with the funny-shaped head over here, well, he helped me, Gramps, but he doesn't speak a word of English.
I grabbed my grandson, eyeing the stranger in the doorway. That my grandson perceived was a hairy man, but I knew at once it was a Bigfoot. I could see the Bigfoot had saved my grandson's life. My gratitude to this creature was off the charts. He was about to glide away, but I indicated for him to stop, to wait, to come into my kitchen. The Bigfoot seemed reluctant, reticent, uncertain. He dubiously followed me. He had to bend his head under the opening where the front door had once been. He was so big that his body filled out the entire space of the door. He almost had to squeeze through it. I led the Bigfoot into my kitchen, grabbing some shopping bags, piling them high with healthy shopping that I was to later learn my daughter had bought for me. I handed him blueberries, apples, strawberries, grapes, bananas, peanuts, dried fruit, peanut butter, brown bread, honey, blueberry muffins, and a packet of cooked chicken pies. I remember the Bigfoot's face when I handed him the blueberries, 'cause they're not in season. The expression on his leathery black face was so joyous that if everybody looked like that if I gave them a present, I would be completely bankrupt because I'd never be able to stop spoiling people. The creature began to open the blueberries, popping a few in his mouth, and made a joyful whooping sound. Whoop! 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 Then we watched him leave, gliding across the snow, until he was gone from sight. Oh boy, did he move with such grace.
He's such a nice man, Gramps.
You know, Thomas, he's a very nice man. My daughter's final comments.
As you can imagine, I realised something untoward had indeed happened when I arrived at my father's house to collect Thomas, as the front door was still off its hinges, which alarmed me greatly. When my father revealed that he'd locked my son outside due to his forgetfulness, I was utterly mortified. I knew that my son would have frozen to death without the intervention of that remarkable Bigfoot. The one thing that boggles my mind is the innocence of my young boy Thomas, who approached a Bigfoot for help, perceiving that he was somewhat different, but not allowing that fact to cloud his judgment. For never once did it fleetingly cross his mind that this creature should be feared. I was so angry with myself for my prideful refusal to see that my father really was suffering from congenital decline. I feared the worst, thinking that he must have the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. But fortunately, tests revealed that he just had a benign growth on his brain that was causing him to sometimes forget things, even occasionally blacking out from time to time. I'm glad to inform you that after a successful surgery to remove the growth on his brain, my father is fighting fit today. Thankfully, he moved into the flat in our yard. The old farmhouse was finally sold, but I am forever indebted to a Bigfoot for saving my son's life. For if he had stayed out all night in those treacherous wintry conditions, he would almost certainly have died. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, he was poles apart from all the other doctors I'd ever visited. He looked at health from an entirely different perspective. He had come highly recommended by a friend of mine, who found his inspirational alternative remedies to healthcare refreshing. He didn't always bring out his script and scribble out a bunch of medications for you that would likely earn him some commission from Big Pharma. On the contrary, he wanted to treat you in a holistic manner.
Look, Mr. Huckleby, I'm not going to beat about the bush. I'm going to be perfectly frank with you. I've been looking at your X-ray results. They don't look terribly good. One of your lungs is not functional, so you're literally operating on one lung. I can see that your lung health is seriously compromised, and this presents a rather big problem for me.
I rubbed my moustache awkwardly. "You're not saying anything new, Doc. I've actually seen hundreds of doctors telling me exactly the same thing that you are. It seems nothing is helping. My breathing condition is getting worse every single day. Sometimes I can't even sleep at night because I'm coughing so much. Other times I quite literally struggle to breathe. I feel like a clogged up chimney that's suffocating from the inside out, if you get my drift. Frankly, Doctor, I'm scared. If I carry on like this, I'm afraid that I might not wake up one day." "I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Huckleberry. I couldn't have said it better myself. I can see you're not in denial about the gravity of your problem." He pointed to the X-ray of my lungs with his pencil. "As you can see here, you have a great deal of mucus accumulating in your lungs. I'm going to advise you to make a phenomenal natural concoction that rarely works miraculously to clear the lungs. I want you to boil the skins of 3 lemons and 3 grapefruits for about 3 hours, covering the skins with a little water. This secret concoction is known as quinine. You can freeze it in batches for your personal use. I would like you to drink 1 tablespoon of this mixture 3 times a day. It works wonders for mucus. In fact, it's great for all kinds of respiratory illnesses, viruses and infections." "I'll give it a go, Doctor," I said, looking at him rather dubiously, with a raised, cynical brow. This was the first doctor giving me a natural remedy. Most wanted to place me on hundreds of medications, none of which have worked at all. This was a whole new approach. "How long have you lived in Chicago, Mr. Huckleberry?" the doctor asked me quizzically. "My entire life, Doc. I was born and raised here, but I fail to see what that's got to do with my lung health." "It has everything to do with your lung health, Mr. Huckleberry. Absolutely everything. Look around you. High-rise buildings everywhere. The air of the city is contaminated, polluted, congested by car fumes, cigarette smoke, allergens, other occupational contaminants, and of course hazards everywhere that potentially irritate the airways of your lung, causing coughing, wheezing, strokes, heart attacks, or even cancer. Not good for a man in your position, functioning only on a single lung. Bearing that all in mind, Mr. Huckleberry, we are also not close to nature here in Chicago, apart from the beach area around Lake Michigan. You have got to go an hour and a half outside of the city to places like Fox River to get some good, clean air. My advice to you is to get out of the city, go and live somewhere further afield, where you have copious amounts of fresh air. I will promise you this, Mr. Huckleberry, you will be able to breathe again. You will live longer, regain your health. You have everything to gain, nothing to lose. In my opinion, it's a no-brainer for you." "But are you sure fresh air makes such a difference, Doc?" "Without a doubt. Do you know in the Blue Mountains in Australia, there are a plethora of centenarians living out there, and it's all due to the eucalyptus vapour and the fresh mountain air. Very, very significant for your health. Might I also suggest an infusion of eucalyptus oil in your home at night? It helps open up the airwaves. You just need a vaporizer and some genuine eucalyptus oil. You can order that online. I have here a booklet of breathing exercises I'd like you to follow. Breathing, Mr. Huckleberry, it's the essence of life." I had visited that doctor 5 years ago, following his advice to the T, never looking back, not even once, with an ounce of regret. That doctor had been absolutely right about everything. The miracle concoction made from grapefruit had literally cleared my lungs up within the first 10 days. I take it now every day of my life, as it efficiently clears the mucus away. I no longer cough or have sleepless nights anymore. But it was moving out of the city that certainly enabled me to breathe again. The issues with my lungs had now become a thing of the past. It had not been difficult to leave my old life in Chicago behind. As I was of retirement age, I didn't have much baggage, had zero interest in material possessions, no children or grandchildren to speak of. Furthermore, my wife had tragically died 5 years prior from a diabetic coma. In truth, it hadn't even crossed my mind to live anywhere else in the world except Chicago. I suppose it was all that I'd ever actually known. But I had nothing to lose moving away from the big city. It had been the best decision I had ever made. Besides, Chicago is incredibly flat, really rather like Amsterdam and Holland, so it certainly was great to embrace some mountainous terrain for a change. I knew I wouldn't miss the political corruption there either, or the rising level of crime in the city, for gangland shootings had become pretty commonplace. That being said, I would almost certainly miss all my friends, along with Chicago's amazing food that had been responsible for the rising level of obesity in the city, with some of the guiltiest offenders being Chicago's deep dish pizza, Chicago's Vienna beef dog, Italian beef sandwiches, and Garrett's gourmet popcorn in a plethora of different flavours. So many more delicious foods that were all guilty as charged. I had done a great deal of research online, discovering a rustic cabin for sale in the woods in southeastern Missouri, part of the Ozark foothills, not far from the city of Piedmont. "The name's Huckleberry, Tom Huckleberry," I told the estate agent. "I'm phoning from Chicago. I'd like to put an offer in for the cabin in the woods, on the Ozark foothills." "But should you not see it first, Mr. Huckleberry? I'm going to be brutally honest with you, but the cabin is incredibly remote. It's off-grid, very, very basic. It's been on the market for a long time. No one has snatched it up yet." "That does not matter," I insisted. "I want the place." "But Mr. Huckleberry, I want to assure you, this isn't the first time someone like you from a metropolitan city like Chicago has recklessly brought a cabin like this off the cuff, without even seeing it first. Now, I strongly don't recommend you do this. Now, I want to tell you the last time this happened to me, the impetuous man purchased the cabin from me, ended up screaming like a banshee when he realised it was off-grid, miles away from the nearest town, literally in the middle of nowhere. Of course, Mr. Huckleberry, he claimed that I hadn't informed him of these crucial facts, which was certainly far from the truth. I regret to say he was rather impulsive like you are. He made my life a living hell, claiming that I'd hoodwinked him into buying the place. The truth was, he couldn't hack the isolation, the loneliness of the Badlands. You see, for many city dwellers like you, it's a pipe dream to move to a remote area, and then to buy a cabin in the woods. But when they get here, they often flounder and are improficient at coping with the wilderness. Let's not kid. It's a far cry away from living in a sprawling metropolis with art, culture, fabulous restaurants. It's a world away from all that, and a lonely one at that, Mr. Huckleberry. Your interest in this cabin certainly raises alarm bells for me, along with an airy feeling of déjà vu. You're clearly acquainted with city life, but living out in the wilderness, it's a different ballgame, which is why I'm very reluctant to agree to the sale. I realise all that, I assure you, but I have no intentions of giving you any grief about this. I do know what I'm doing. I really want to buy the cabin." "If you're sure," came the woman's vacillating voice on the other end of the line. "But you cannot say that I didn't warn you, Mr. Huckleberry. I don't want you coming down on me like a ton of bricks if you're desperately disappointed in your purchase." "Of course I wouldn't do that. That would never happen. Forgive me for saying this, miss. It's Mrs. Fernando. Forgive me for saying this, Mrs. Fernando, but isn't it your job as an estate agent to actually encourage people to buy property, rather than to warn them off it? Mr. Huckleberry, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't completely forthright with you. If you want to know why the original owner actually sold the previous place, I'll tell you. I'll be brutally honest with you, in fact. If you must know, he claimed he had a one-on-one encounter with a Bigfoot. The creature was absolutely enormous. It terrified the living daylights out of him, which was why he packed up and sold the cabin. He said he couldn't continue living out there, knowing a monstrous creature like that was loitering around. You see, Mr. Huckleberry, there are things out there in the forest, things that a city dweller like you could not even begin to fathom or comprehend. You see, I know about these things. I've lived in this part of the world all my life. I've learnt about them, heard bizarre, insane, crazy stories that would make your hair curl." "Bigfoot?" I said, rolling the words on my tongue like a lozenge, with a peculiar flavour that I was trying to identify. Bigfoot! Yes, Bigfoot. You can laugh as much as you like, make fun of me, ridicule me if you like, but I'm warning you, Mr. Huckleberry. There are indeed formidable creatures like Bigfoot roaming around those woods. Why would I laugh at you? I have no reason to doubt your claims. If you say the previous owner of the cabin sold up shop due to an encounter with a Bigfoot, I'm rather inclined to believe you. So do you still want to buy the cabin, then? Of course I want to buy the cabin. I'm not going to let an outlandish sighting of a Bigfoot scare me off. That would be very, very stupid. Very well. I can see, Mr. Huckleberry, that you are stubborn, headstrong, pertinacious. I hope you don't live to regret your decision. But congratulations are in order. After the paperwork is complete, I'm delighted to inform you that the cabin is officially yours. I hadn't wasted a moment of time. Within a few days I'd moved into the cabin. The estate agent was absolutely right. It really was a whole world away from my former suburban abode. A rented apartment in the bustling metro area of Chicago, with its honking taxicabs, bright lights and boisterous crowds of people rushing to and from work. In truth, the moment that I laid eyes on my new rural abode, it was love at first sight. There are no words adequate enough to describe its ineffaceable, unpolished beauty, its rugged, unembellished simplicity, its rustic, Arcadian charm, its unassuming, down-to-earth, indigenous allure. The cabin looked as if it belonged with the trees, the sky, the mountainous views, as if it too had burst forth through the earth, rather like a wild flower in the valley. It possessed that easy-going, laid-back, trusting ambience, like a non-judgmental, unconditionally loving grandmother, that welcomed you into her space with open arms. As I was saying, this homespun piece of natural art, built meticulously by a carpenter's creative fair hands, blended into the wood as seamlessly as the surrounding trees, fauna and flora. I even ran my hands around the cabin, to feel the age-old beams, for I felt so connected to everything. It was all so alive, so natural, so unblemished. The cabin was nestled on a grassy clearing in the woods, surrounded on every side by sprawling forest, with of course the exception of its frontage that overlooked a small pebbly beach, and a stream that meandered through the valley, with a feisty rambunctious current, where clouds of white foaming water jetted over sculptural outcrops and voluptuous shapely boulders. In the far distant horizon, you could see the rise and fall of the soft silhouettes of the shadowy mountains, dappling the furthest corners of the ether in splashes of purples, blues and greys, set against the vast unending expanse of the cobalt blue sky. Could anything in this world be more beguiling? I had brought with me some simple furnishings, which included my bed, a kitchen table, chairs, a walnut dresser, a couple of comfortable settees, a recliner, a collection of warm rugs, a desk, and of course some outdoor furniture for the wraparound wooden porch. I was fortunate to have a gas cooker, oven, gas refrigerator, along with solar grid energy, and a natural water supply from the stream. I had decided to live my new life as simplistically as I could, which was a decision I never regretted to date. I would visit the town in my truck twice a month to gather supplies, to have hot water for a shower, visit a launderette or a hairdresser. Otherwise I would fish and hunt in the woods quite regularly. The latter became something I began to really enjoy. You would invariably think that I would become lonely, but not at all. I was always the kind of person that thoroughly enjoyed my own company, revelling in the stillness, solitude and peace of the natural world, often reading fictional novels well into the early hours of the morning. The verdurous woods around the cabin were absolutely mesmerising, the sort of place that took your breath away, a conglomerate of individualised species of trees gathered together like old friends, including white oaks, short-leaf pines, cottonwoods and silver birches, that swept up unabashedly into the sky, like whopping, viridescent skyscrapers. It was like stepping into another realm or room, if you like, a shaded, tranquil retreat, entertaining your senses with musical birdsong, along with visual displays of lacy ferns and flourishing luxuriant ground covers.
Then there were tree trunks, branches, twigs and stones, scattered liberally across the forest, like pieces of indigenous art, made all the more bedazzling by the moss that swathed everything in sprinklings of verdant, fairy dust. One day, as I was gathering pieces of dry wood together to make a sizable collection of firewood for the coming winter, I sensed that something was watching me, but what it was, I couldn't imagine. I knew this instinctively, as living alone meant I instantaneously perceived that someone had most certainly invaded my private space. It was a feeling that greatly unsettled me, made all the worse by the fact that I couldn't identify my observer. It unnerved me, sending ominous prickles down my spine, like sharp electric shocks. I stumbled upon an area that demanded my attention, as long thin saplings were bent with deliberate creativity, some twisted over into arches, while others were snapped in some kind of symbolic alignment or figurative arrangement that suggested to me that it was a signature or message that was written in timber. On my close approach to this spot, that was when I heard a loud snoring sound, the kind that would invariably force a marital partner to have to sleep in another room. It possessed a deep, throaty, nasal resonance. This was when I realised someone was on my property. I imagined it had to be a homeless vagrant sleeping rough. My curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled away the saplings to get a clearer look. I was to discover that behind the bent trees was a flattened clearing, almost like a large nest, covered in folded grass. I could see a colossal heap of grey bedraggled hair, lying sprawled across the ground, rather like a lumpy sleeping bag. This humongous wad of hair was the snoring offender. Sitting next to the sleeping adult was a small creature, about 3 foot tall, playing with acorns, rather like you or I might play a game of marbles. This must have been the little creature that had been staring at me. I knew at once that these outlandish creatures were Bigfoots. The little creature looked up at me. It was small, thin and lanky, covered in long brown hair, with the cutest eyes I've ever seen. They twinkled with a mischievous humour, curiosity, and a warm, open friendliness. I was so stunned I quickly moved away, hardly daring to believe what I'd stumbled upon. What must have been a Bigfoot nursery, I assumed, but the adult on babysitting duty was fast asleep, obliviously unaware of my presence, and I wanted to keep it that way. I quickly walked away, feeling a rising level of trepidation, as judging by the size of the large Bigfoot lying passed out, I dreaded to imagine the size of the thing should it actually stand straight up. As I walked away to my cabin, the little Bigfoot began to follow me home, keeping a wary distance away from me. I was practically begging it to return to its mother by indicating that it should go back from whence it came. But this balmy creature wasn't having any of it. It parked itself outside my cabin from a distance away, watching me chopping wood. It then left and went away. I breathed a huge sigh of relief, so thankful that it had finally gone, hoping with all my heart that it wasn't coming back any time soon. The last thing I wanted was to make an adult Bigfoot angry. But day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, the baby Bigfoot would visit me regularly, watching me from a distance of about 6 foot away. In the years that followed, he became bigger and bigger and bigger, until he wasn't small any more. But the growth was so subtle and obscure to me that I barely noticed it at all, until one day I remember looking at him and thinking, "My God, if I didn't know you, you would frighten the life out of me." For at that time he was about 7 foot tall, 600 pounds and 3 foot wide across the shoulder area, with overlong arms and an uncannily human face. Sometimes the creature would make me laugh by imitating what I was doing. His imitations of me were so comical I would burst out laughing. The more I laughed, the more the creature enjoyed performing for me. He was a natural actor, revelling in all the attention I gave him. He often enacted some interesting acrobatic stunts that would take years in the gym for the average gymnast to accomplish, but he did this with a flawless fluidity. I often threw bags of salted chips for him, or peanuts or pieces of bacon, as the creature craved salt. I noticed when the Bigfoot didn't visit me, I would actually feel sad. He had become like a constant companion to me. I gave him the name Hercules because he was so strong and powerful.
One night, as I was tucked up in bed reading a cosy novel under the light of my kerosene lantern, I suddenly heard a loud banging sound at the cabin door. Then it was flung open so violently, as cool air just wafted through the cabin. In the dark shadows I saw the silhouette of a hefty, burly, bald-headed man with a very thick neck and a sizable body that had obviously been acquired from heavy-duty workouts in the gym. He was standing yards away from me, leering at me with a vindictive expression on his face that left me quaking and shaking in my boots. I noticed at once that he was wearing prison scrubs, so it didn't take a rocket scientist to establish that he was an escaped convict. At that time I had no way of knowing that he had murdered 2 prison guards while being relocated from one prison to another. He was staring at me with a frenzied look, like a rabid dog, that gave me the distinct impression he was unhinged. My eyes darted from his murderous eyes to the staggeringly sharp knife he was holding in his hands. "Out of bed, old man!" he commanded, holding the knife to my throat, cutting into my skin so that I could feel the trails of blood trickling down my neck. I knew instinctively this man meant business. What do you want?" I stammered. "Some food for a start would be very nice. I haven't eaten for many days. If you do everything I tell you to do, I will not hurt you. I need a truck, rifle, and plenty of money." "I never keep cash here in my cabin." "Well, you can give me your cash point number, can you not? I will evacuate the funds myself. Of course, I will have to keep you tied up here in the cabin indefinitely until I've got as much money as I need. Isn't that a bit extreme? Get up! I told you, I'm half-starved. Cook me a meal now. It would help if you'd stop holding that knife against my neck. Take me to your refrigerator. What have you got for me to eat?" I picked up the kerosene lamp, walking over to my small kitchenette, where I opened the refrigerator, feeling all the while the cold edge of the steel blade biting against my neck. Once again I could feel water trickling down my neck, that I knew immediately was blood. I scanned the refrigerator. I've got eggs, bacon, beef patties, baked beans. Get on with it then. Start cooking. I began to size up my quarry. Granted, I was in my 70s. This man was easily 40 years my junior. Much stronger than I was too. But I was pretty certain that once he'd gotten everything he needed from me, then he would murder me. In fact, if you stopped to think about it, he would gain everything if he stayed here on my plot of land. It would be easy for him to get my PIN number from me, murder me, and live the rest of his days here in this remote cabin, without anyone ever finding him. It was not in his interest to keep me alive at all. I knew I needed to do something, but what? I couldn't even begin to imagine. The following morning the man commanded me to get some water from the stream, following me with his rifle. As I was placing my bucket into the flowing water, I caught sight of Hercules, who was hiding in plain sight behind the trees, clearly aware that something was really off this morning. He knew I never entertained guests, so he moved ever closer towards me, watching me intently, remaining in the shadows. That was when he saw the man placing the rifle against my head. He ascertained that I was almost certainly in trouble. All of a sudden I could hear a whistle. A while later it was followed by an answer, another whistle. I knew it was my friend calling for reinforcements. What seemed only like moments later, 2 monstrous creatures came thundering towards us. The ground literally heaved and groaned as heavy feet pounded the earthen floor. The prison convict who was watching me collect the water in the bucket turned around to see what was making that commotion. He could not believe what he was observing, as 2 gigantic Bigfoot bounded towards him like lions ambushing their prey. To an unknown observer, you would have been in no doubt that this man's life hung before him precariously like a thread on a spider's web. The man screamed, "Oh my God! A Bigfoot! A Bigfoot!" He trembled like a quaking aspen tree. "Bloody hell! A Bigfoot! Oh my God! Help! Help! Help!" he shrieked. He trembled so violently, trying to aim the rifle at Hercules, but he couldn't even hold it straight, as he was shaking so much, and the bullets went ricocheting across the ground, failing superbly at meeting their targets. Hercules seized the man in his arms. I was so stunned how tiny he looked in Hercules' charge, which really made me appreciate just how huge my friend actually was. The man frantically tried to escape, oscillating his arms backwards and forwards, screaming for help. Help! Help! Why don't you help me? Help me! Hercules tossed the man in the air, caught him, then aiming for a treacherous rocky outcrop in the water, he flung the man in the air, where for a moment he took flight and then went plummeting towards the rocky outcrop. I heard a mighty crash as my oppressor's head was violently bludgeoned against a jagged rock. His skull cracked open like an egg. Globs of blood, brain matter, and pieces of scalp with hair still attached to it floated down the stream. The man's limp body was flung backwards into the water, transforming it into a bright crimson colour. I saw the corpse floating in the water like a mannequin, the eyes lifeless and glazed over, left to the mercy of the rigorous current. I am afraid I had no empathy for this awful man. I realised the large Bigfoot who had accompanied Hercules was the same creature I'd saw babysitting him all those years ago in the Bigfoot nursery, who had fallen asleep, snoring loudly. I could perceive she was a grandmother figure, who was exceedingly protective over her grandson. She looked at me with warm, kind eyes, and then glided away into the heart of the forest. Hercules, however, did not budge, but spent the next few days watching over me vigilantly, rather like a protective guard dog, ever concerned that another offender might try to harm me. A few days later, I tuned into my radio to listen to the news. An ex-prison convict, Tyler Hughes, escaped from prison a few days ago, and is responsible for the heinous murder of 2 prison officers, which occurred when Tyler was being transported to another prison. He was found lying dead by a couple of hikers today, floating in a stream. It appears that he had sustained a blunt force injury to the head, but the reason for his death remains unknown. Officer Angus Levington said he felt no sympathy for the violent thug, who had been responsible for killing 2 of his very best friends, who he describes as exemplary officers that were an asset to the force. "I've been in the force for over 10 years. I believe some people are born evil. He is one of those people, evil to the core. The world is a better place without him." Mrs. Hughes, who was estranged from her son 20 years ago, said she held little remorse over her son's death. She told the papers today that when growing up, he killed her beloved spaniels just for a joke by shoving them in plastic bags and throwing them in the lake because she refused to buy him an ice cream. "I knew after that incident," she told the paper, "that my son was a bad egg. I was always a good mother, but that boy was born evil." Hughes was sentenced to life imprisonment for the brutal murder of his girlfriend when she called off the relationship after being subject to his tireless abuse. As you can imagine, when I realised what this odious, awful man had done, I was even more convinced that he would have murdered me if given the chance. Hercules no longer lives on my property, as he's partnered with a new mate, but on occasion he passes through my neck of the woods to say hello. He introduced me to his female partner once. She is so reticent and kept peeking at me from behind the tree and hiding away. She appeared painfully shy. Hercules is now a proud father of 2 little Bigfoot that I was privy to meeting, and they weren't as shy as their mother. I still live on my own in the heart of the American wilderness, and would never have it any other way. But as for having any lung problems, those wee issues from the past have all but gone, as the fresh air has changed my life, along with a fabulous concoction made from lemon and grapefruit that I highly recommend to anyone suffering from lung issues, colds, viruses and infections. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the first time I laid eyes on Pippa Lockwood, I was completely infatuated. I mean, who could wear bright dangling yellow earrings like that and still look so alluring? I had noticed her in church of all places, an implausible, random sighting of a young girl who held my attention like no one else I'd ever met before. I say random, as I barely ever entered a church building, as growing up my parents despised anything to do with organised religion. Their indelible anti-religious influences had unwittingly rubbed off on my life.
It was not that I didn't believe in the big man upstairs. On the contrary, I did perceive that a higher power was possibly involved in our lives in some way. Otherwise nothing really made any sense. But in truth, I really had not given the matter much thought. I was only in church on this specific occasion, as I happened to be staying at my best buddy's house, for we were planning to go rabbit hunting the following day with his father. So it was exceedingly serendipitous to be in this beguiling stone building, with its colourful arched stained glass windows, depicting varying images of Christ on the cross or as a baby in a manger. Pippa had entered the church 15 minutes into the service, right in the middle of a sermon. She stood at the front doorway, yards away from where the preacher was addressing his congregation, her face flushing pink, her eyes darting awkwardly to the man behind the pulpit, who glanced at her with a brief despairing look, along with a cynical raised brow, as if to say, "You're late again." It seemed like every head in the entire congregation had turned around to look directly at her, almost as if her intrusion in the service had not gone unnoticed. I would hasten to say she had ruffled a few feathers, possibly making some churchgoers more than a little miffed to be so rudely interrupted, because I did discern a few shaking heads. I watched as she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," to all the parishioners, bending her head over in a submissive, cowering position, virtually crawling across the front row of seats to sit next to a very prim-looking woman with dark red hair, held away from her face in a coiled bun. She was her mother's daughter, all right. You could see the striking resemblance. I could see the mother give her daughter an infuriated, "How could you look?" "Who is that?" I whispered to Carton, my friend. "That girl over there with the red hair, the bright yellow earrings." "Oh, that's Pippa Lockwood. She's the minister's daughter. She's forever arriving to the services late. It drives her parents completely dilly. I can't tell you how many sermons she's actually rudely interrupted like this. She seems to be making a habit of it lately. Goodness knows why." "You've got to be kidding," I thought. A minister's daughter? Did it get any worse than that? I groaned inwardly. Damn! Why did she have to be a minister's daughter of all things? She could have been anybody else's daughter, but a minister's daughter? Please, no. That really was a bummer. She was so lovely. Dark auburn hair, blue sparkling eyes, porcelain skin. It didn't get more beguiling than that. Well, not for me, it didn't. Unfortunately, red hair for me was my Achilles heel, as it has always made me weak at the knees. Oh, goodness, she was drop-dead gorgeous. I was completely smitten. I remember the entire service. My head was filled with all kinds of ways I could try and surreptitiously introduce myself to this provocative young woman, who looked as if she was likely around about my age, which was about 21 at the time. I'd never been a desperately confident young man. I was rather on the skinny side, but my father always assured me that I would grow into my body one day, and even dream of being this skinny again. Somehow I seriously doubted that. I had tried absolutely everything to put on weight, but nothing worked. I wasn't bad looking. Well, so I'd been assured by my mother's friends, who told me that with my dark wavy hair, green eyes, and bright charming smile, that I was a heartbreaker. That, too, I seriously doubted. I've got to meet her, I told Carton, as the church emptied. It was now or never, I thought, holding my breath, gritting my teeth, crossing my fingers, and ambling casually towards the unsuspecting girl, trying to keep a nonchalant, indifferent, fixed look on my face, when on the inside I was literally squirming with terror, like an octopus caught on a fisherman's spear, terrified of being rejected. What if she turned me down, refused to go on a date with me? He who dares wins, I firmly told myself. That was my mother's motto in life. She had always persuaded me of this. If you really want something badly enough in life, son, don't ever be afraid to grab it with both hands. Approach it with boldness and conviction. Do it with courage. If you don't go for it, the opportunity may pass you by like a hot air balloon on the wind that escapes you, floating off into the wild blue yonder, never ever to be seen again. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands were clammy, I was trembling on the insides, but I refused to allow any lingering doubts to subdue this quintessential opportunity to meet this ravishing red-haired goddess. I was now directly behind her, so close in fact that I could touch one of her buoyant curls if I wanted to, but I daren't.
I cleared my throat so loudly, with a deep guttural growl that earned me more than a few disapproving glances from some of the parishioners, who were possibly thinking I was more than a little vulgar. But I really didn't care about that. It worked a charm, and that was the whole idea. Pippa Lockwood turned around to see who was making that atrocious guttural sound. Her cornflower blue eyes were looking directly into mine. "Bless you," she said. "That was quite some,
Thank you. I stuttered. That was quite an entrance you made in the church this morning, if I might say so. Every eye was on you. Do you happen to make a habit of being late, so that you can make a grand entrance, rather like the Queen of England addressing the Houses of Parliament?" I teased. I didn't do that intentionally. I wasn't trying to make a grand entrance. It just happened. I was only pulling your leg. I keep doing it every week, arriving late at services. I'm going to have an earful from my father this evening. I know it. I was wondering if perhaps you could consider going out for coffee with me sometime.
Pippa looked at me in surprise. Then her face wrinkled up in disgust, and my heart almost missed a beat.
"Oh, I quite understand," I said, flushing with embarrassment. "You're not interested." "You misunderstand me. I hate coffee. I've never ever understood how anybody could like such a bitter, nasty drink. But I wouldn't be adverse to a milkshake if you asked me." My face lit up like a Christmas tree. She hadn't refused me. "I know a fabulous place we can go. They do the best milkshakes in town. Thick, creamy, luscious. It's a date then, but it might just help if I knew your name." "My name's Lachlan Wedderburn Maxwell," I told her.
"Wow, that is a mouthful," she laughed, "but I like it. I like it a lot. Long names are so interesting. Yours sounds incredibly posh, really rather pretentious, but I like it." I hadn't known at that point in time how dating a man of the cloth's daughter would actually pan out for me. I might have had extreme reservations if I'd even envisaged for a second the hoops I'd have to jump over to date this alluring goddess, but Pippa was worth all the hassle. After all, nothing you ever really wanted in life came easy. Well, not for me, it didn't. I had to fight for everything I'd ever desired, but in reality, it certainly made the rewards much greater. The first time I arrived at Pippa's family home to pick her up, I could see her sapient, shrewd father sussing me out as if he was determining whether my intentions towards his daughter were indeed honourable. He was like an astute buzzard flying over a dead carcass in the wilderness. I mean, this sagacious man was checking me out as if he was searing through my mind, dividing bone and sinew, to see what was really in my heart. It was more than a little confounding for me. "Come in, son," he said in a deep male voice. "Might I have a brief word with you in private?" "Sure," I said, looking increasingly uncomfortable, suspecting that he was going to give me the 3rd degree by asking me all kinds of awkward, inappropriate questions. "Dad," Pippa had groaned, rolling her eyes. "Please don't, Dad. You're embarrassing me," she said, her face flushing a bright pink. "Really? Must you do this? Please, please, Dad, don't do this." "Well, if that's the way you feel, Pippa, I'll say it as it is in front of my daughter. What are your intentions with my Pippa here?" The question hit me like a gun to the head. Sir, we're just going out for a milkshake. It's not that complicated." "As long as that is all it is," said Mr. Lockwood, looking at me intensely, his judicious eyes almost burning into mine. He waggled his omniscient finger very suggestively at me. "I know all about young men and their raging hormones. I was a young man myself once, so believe me when I say I know the score. I assure you, Lachlan, my daughter is a virtuous young girl. She's a rose that is not to be picked until her wedding day, if you get my drift," he said, raising a brow. "We're a religious family. We take these kind of things very, very seriously." Yes, sir, I said, shuffling awkwardly and flushing crimson with embarrassment, feeling desperately humiliated, almost as if I'd been caught with my pants down or my hands in the till stealing thousands of dollars. This man had the unfortunate, daunting capacity of making me feel uncomfortably discomposed all the time, almost as if I'd committed a heinous crime. I knew that my face looked as guilty as hell, rather like a dog that had eaten the fillet steak on the counter and was feigning innocence, but no one was buying his cowering act. In truth, if I had not been so enamoured by Mr. Lockwood's daughter, I would have run a mile, never dated the girl again. Maybe that was Mr. Lockwood's clever idea behind his interrogation, scaring off all Pippa's adoring male admirers, but the men worth their weight in gold would stick around despite everything. I was to realise that dating Pippa was to become one of the biggest challenges of my young life, as her astucious father was always breathing down my back like a dragon. The calculating man was a complete nightmare, watching my every move, loitering around every dark corner like a skulking leopard, lying in wait to pounce upon me at any given opportunity. He had this uncanny, airy ability to turn up at places just by chance. One time, for example, when I'd taken Pippa to a pizza restaurant, who should be sitting there a few tables down, waving at us exuberantly with bright, dazzling smiles, but Pippa's own parents. Now I ask you, what are the chances of that ever happening? It's about 1,000,000 to 1 at the National Lottery. But there he was, Mr. Lockwood, of course, shadowing me like a detective inspector on the trail of a villainous thug. How extraordinary! Hello, Lachlan. It's very good to see you tonight. Who would have thought that we would both end up eating in exactly the same Italian restaurant this evening, at exactly the same time? How very, very strange. Of course you know it's no accident, Pippa would whisper to me, as her father kept glancing over at our table, watching me with his hawk-like eyes. He's doing this on purpose, I know he is. My dad is so terrified of you taking advantage of his little girl. Honestly, it's so humiliating. Sometimes I wish the ground would swallow me whole. Why did I ever have to be born a minister's daughter, for goodness sake? You took the very words out of my mouth. I was thinking the very same thing. I feel like he's been stalking us. Has he always been like this? Always. He's very suspicious of every boy I ever date. Doesn't trust them an inch. One day when I dropped Pippa off home after a date, secretly hoping that this would be the quintessential golden moment when I would give her a long, impassioned kiss, who should come barging out of the house like a bad-tempered hippopotamus but her own father? He would dash up to the car in a frenzy like a frantic bee, buzzing over a can of cola, hurriedly opening the passenger side door for his daughter so that she could get out, just to ensure that any intimacy between us was wiped away as swiftly as the rain on a windscreen. So any opportunity for me to so much as brush my lips against his daughter's cheeks was completely expunged from me. I knew her father was doing this deliberately, as he always gave me that self-satisfied, smug, triumphant look, as he must have known he was annoying me profusely. Little did he realise that his overprotective behaviour was doing little to put me off his daughter. "Hello, Lachlan," he would say almost mockingly. "Did you have a good date with my daughter this evening?" "Yes, sir," I would say. "Very nice, thank you." "Good. I'm very glad to hear it." Another time when I pulled up the drive to drop Pippa off home, I got so close to kissing her, so close, only seconds away, and I mean seconds, before my lips were about to touch hers. Who should be knocking frantically against the car window, staring in at us like an agog-eyed goldfish, but Mr. Lockwood himself. Of course, I couldn't have expected anything else. His rounded face was beaming in at us brightly, like a glaring, obtrusive, blinding sunshine. I really wanted to throttle the annoying man. I felt as mad as a hatter. I knew he didn't trust me an inch with his daughter. His scepticism about my intentions towards her was exceedingly frustrating. Did he ever think that a normal man would put up with such intensive surveillance? Hardly. It was less than lightly. I had it on good authority that the man had been checking up on my family, gleaming about as much information about us as possible, leaving no stone unturned in his ardent investigation of my family roots, possibly trying to see if my bloodline had any connections to piracy on the high seas. One day I had an idea to get one up on the incredulous Mr. Lockwood, to spend some quality time with my girlfriend, where I might actually get a fleeting moment to kiss her for the first time. I mean, I'd been dating her for so long, and even that privilege had been withheld from me. But believe me, I had tried. But everywhere I went with her, I felt that we were both like two fish in a tank of sharks, warily watching our backs all the time. My mother was telling me that Mr. and Mrs. McLaughlin were going away for the weekend. She had asked them on my behalf if they wouldn't mind if me and my girlfriend could camp out on their private beach in Oregon. "Oh, camping," said Pippa excitedly, her face lighting up like a warm Caribbean sunset. "I love camping." Then her face dropped. The excitement ebbed away like a feather in the wind, her lips curling downwards into a frown, her eyes momentarily losing their sparkle. "But what about Dad? He'd never allow me to spend the night with you without a ring on my finger. He's rigid, my Dad, very unyielding. He would never trust us completely on our own, never. There is a way around your suspicious father. We could call his bluff. It might just work to our advantage. Could you not just tell him a white lie? Tell him you're staying with a girlfriend, so that we can sneak off together without him knowing about it. If he thinks you're staying with a girlfriend, he'll be disarmed. Goodness gracious, he treats you like a pathetic child. He watches me suspiciously like a hawk all the time. We never get good quality time together without him breathing down our backs like a pent-up dragon. I've been so longing to kiss you, but at this rate it's never ever going to happen. It's driving me insane." "You're longing to kiss me? Well, you're not the only one. I'd say ditto to that," she said with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "I do fancy the sound of that." "Tell me about it," I said, raising a brow. "But I guarantee you one thing. If I so much as touch your lips, charging through the undergrowth over there would be your hefty father, looking very, very surly." "You're funny," laughed Pippa. "You've got my father down to a T. You know, let's do it. Dad's brought this on himself. If he trusted me a little more and gave me a bit more credit, we wouldn't have to go sneaking around his back like this." And so it was I set up camp for me and Pippa, on quite literally the most exquisite piece of pristine private beach that you've ever seen, on the Oregon coast. The place would have made your jaw hang open. It was spectacularly beautiful. The McLaughlin $1 million residence was nestled on the top of a rocky embankment, rather like a crisp white rose among a curvaceous outcrop of voluptuous boulders, that, much like the clouds in the sky, embodied all kinds of curious shapes that made your imagination run wild with creative, inspirational ideas in regards to the shapes of the rocks and what they represented. A long, sweeping, ornate black wrought iron staircase with decorative balustrades composed of twirling leaves and flowers led from the house to the beach, where the long ribbon of white beach sand stretched to an infinitude to the wild blue yonder. There was a vast area of woodland forest, made up mostly of tall Douglas fir trees clustered together, along with the occasional Japanese maple or crab-apple tree that swept up a precipitous hilly embankment. Luckily I found a decent clearing that was fringed by Douglas firs, that made a perfect windbreak, but was close enough to the beach and, of course, the exquisite oceanfront views, where I was able to pitch up our tent. That was when I saw Pippa gliding down the staircase with an overnight bag in one hand, as she gracefully trotted towards me, her golden red hair bouncing buoyantly across her shoulders. Maybe her father was right, I thought. She needed protecting for me, as right now she had completely stolen my breath away. She looked so beautiful. It was all I could do not to get a little hot under the collar. She looked as if she was appearing on one of those hair shampoo advertisements for L'Oreal Paris, the way her hair was blowing up in the wind. "It's so beautiful here," she gasped in wondrous awe. "I'm so glad I came. My word, imagine being so rich that you own your own private beach. How do your parents know these McLaughlins?" "My father taught Mr. McLaughlin how to play chess. The rest is history. They've been friends for many years. He made his money in the coal industry, I gather." "It's good to have friends in high places. I mean, a beach to ourselves. You've got to be kidding. It doesn't get better than that." Suddenly I felt overcome with the most dreadful shyness as I held Pippa's hands, as this was the first moment I'd ever been able to touch her properly,
due to her father's beady eyes, observing my every move like a suspicious, disapproving headmaster, ready to rap my knuckles in any second with his heavy iron belt. I can assure you, my heart was racing through my chest as I felt so excited to be holding her hand. I felt as if all my Christmases had come at once. The only way I can describe it to you is rather like being deprived of your favourite food on a diet, and then you eat your first bite of chocolate cake after a long period of abstinence. That first mouthful has got to be utterly mind-blowing, decadent, naughty, unrestrained. Before long we chased each other across the beach, giggling, laughing, knocking each other over in the luxurious soft sand that caressed our feet with its soft exfoliants. We kissed, and we kissed, and we kissed. We couldn't stop. I was on a high like never before. For kissing Pippa, let's just say it melted my heart like butter, made me weak at the knees. For no woman had ever had this effect on me. And in this moment it hit me like a hatchet to the head that I'd fallen hard for this girl, rarely hard, and there was not a lot I could do about it. I felt a bit like a fly caught up in a spider's web, that I could no longer deny my feelings for her. I was literally head over heels in love. We ran into the surf, splashing each other with water, feeling its salty coolness envelop our feet in a refreshing spray. We even played with a bat and ball, made large sand castles like little children. I can't recall a time in my life I felt more animated, more alive, more happy. Later in the afternoon, when the sun was beginning to wind down for the day, dappling the horizon in splashes of golds, yellows, tangerines and pinks, we sat by the fire pit cooking burgers, chicken wings and spare ribs over a grill, finally tucking into the delectable barbecue that tasted so good in the salty sea air. We watched the undulating breakers of the ocean rise and fall, crashing over the occasional boulder with a white bubbly spray of water. How I loved watching the waves moving across the sand, pulling ever backwards and forwards, rather like a yo-yo on a string, leaving behind an indelible wet trail on the sea sand, lined by a frothy frill.
"Look over there," said Pippa. "A man!"
There was a large figure on the beach walking down the white sand. But who was he?
"I thought you said that this was a private beach. But if that's the case, what is the man doing there? It's not even that cold, but it looks like he's dressed for the Winter Olympics in those woolly ski pants of his. A little like overkill, if you ask me." In truth, I wasn't happy to see a stranger loitering around this private beach. Maybe word of the McLaughlin's weekend away had come to his attention, for it would seem that his tight-fitting woolly ski pants were complemented by a snug, tight-fitting jacket, and on his head it looked like he was wearing a balaclava. He was too far away to study closely, but certainly on first impressions he did look rather strange. "You don't think he's planning to rob the McLaughlin's, and is hanging out on the beach waiting for his buddies to arrive so they can pilferage the house together?"
"I don't think it would be very easy for them to do that. If my memory serves me right, I think the house has a state-of-the-art security system that alerts the security company, if anything breaks into the house, that is."
"Well, there are ways to deactivate security systems, surely. You know, like some of those great bank robberies you hear about."
"Maybe. But a big bank is a lot more profitable to break into than $1 million residence, I assure you. Can you even begin to imagine the meticulous planning involved in a scheme like that? It wouldn't be an easy endeavour to undertake by any means."
"Well, if that's the case, what's he doing there, loitering around a private beach like an odious bad smell? I wish he'd go. He's invading our privacy."
"I'm not sure what he's doing here." The man continued to walk along the beach, but he almost glided as he walked, with such an incredible grace. My thoughts morphed from him being a robber to a ballet dancer or a gymnast, as he didn't have those jarring, jolting movements you see in the average walker or runner. I'd never seen anyone walk so fluidly before, with such extraordinary deportment. He lowered himself on the ground, sitting back on the sand, gazing up in wondrous awe at the sunset, obviously as beguiled by it as we were. "He's no robber," I told Pippa. "He's definitely not a robber. He's a man that clearly enjoys the natural world. He's trespassing on a private beach to enjoy the privacy of the view. I think I'll go and say hello. Let him know we're here."
"But are you sure that's a good idea?"
"Actually, I do have an ulterior motive, I admit. Do you see the way he walked? I just think he might be a gymnast or a dancer. I'm eager to find out.
I tell you what, I'll watch your back. I've got my cell phone here. If he gives you any hassles at all, I'll call the police. Just wave to me if you have any problems with him whatsoever. Righty-o, I said. As I ambled towards the mysterious stranger, the closer I ventured to him, the more acutely aware I became of his substantial size. For on a seated upright position, the stranger appeared exceedingly tall, with a sizable girth. I must say I was really rather perturbed by his woolly attire, that I couldn't see clearly, as I was not wearing my long-distance glasses at the time, which I had removed as the day was now drawing in. I never wear glasses in the evening. "Hallo there," I called out from a little way away, just to get his attention and alert him to my presence, so he wasn't completely startled out of his mind when he saw me. As I approached the stranger close up, I stopped dead in my tracks, because I could see that this was no man. This was a Bigfoot. Oh my God! Truly there are no words to describe how shocked and confounded I was. I was dumbfounded. I was certain my mouth was possibly hanging open like an astonished goldfish. The creature looked directly at me, his dark eyes seemingly amused by my reaction to him, as they twinkled with amusement. He patted the ground next to him, indicating for me to take a seat, as if he wanted my company. At this I was more than a little hesitant, wary, ever so slightly reluctant, which was a natural reaction on my part. For I do not exaggerate when I say that this creature was colossal sitting up, so what he was like standing up I could only imagine. It was like getting up close and personal to a lion in the wild, hoping with all your heart he wasn't going to bite your hand off. But in reality, despite the daunting, impassive physical appearance of this creature, he was anything but predatory. He seemed warm, convivial, friendly even, and not remotely concerned about my presence. It was exceedingly bizarre, as I've often heard of Bigfoot shooing people away from places by throwing stones at them. But this incongruous Bigfoot was inviting me into his space. I knew instinctively his intentions were not nefarious. It was like I could read the creature's thoughts. I felt as if he was saying, "Come and watch the sunset with me. I really would appreciate the company." It was with a little trepidation that I sat down next to this Bigfoot. I was so close to him that I could literally touch him, but I didn't. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, as some of the hair there was less dense. I could even see how ripped the creature was beneath his dark grey leathery skin, as the ropey curls of the tight muscles could easily be discerned. The creature breathed like a horse from a very flat aquatic nasal cavity on his nose, but the thing that I've never anticipated before was just how human his face was. Granted, he did have the quintessential pointed head and the long primate arms often talked about, but other than being totally enormous and covered with long flowing black hair, he was almost completely human. I did think his face had a rugged handsomeness about it, with very prominent high cheekbones, a square jawline, and such interesting intelligent eyes. The creature started speaking to me in a language I've never heard before, that sounded like an old indigenous language spoken by the American Indians from times gone by. I listened, nodded and agreed, as we watched the sunset. As the sunset finally faded away, before the night rolled in, the Bigfoot got up. I nearly passed out on the spot, as he towered above me at over 7 foot tall. I felt so tiny and inconspicuous next to him. The Bigfoot tapped me on the back, and then just glided away. I watched in awe as he almost floated across the sea sand, leaving behind him a trail of whopping footprints in the sand. "Well," asked Pippa excitedly, "is he a gymnast, the man I mean?"
"You could say, in a manner of speaking, that he is. If you must know, it was a Bigfoot."
"Have you lost leave of your senses? Why on earth did you go and sit next to a creature like that? Aren't they supposed to be dangerous? I can't believe what you just did back there."
"Well, I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I didn't see that he wasn't human at first, until I got up close and personal. But he was so kind. He wanted me to watch the sunset with him." Pippa's mouth hung open like a Venus flytrap.
"My God, you saw a Bigfoot, and you sat right next to him. I've never heard of that before. That's got to be the weirdest thing I've ever heard."
"Not necessarily. Why should a Bigfoot not appreciate a sunset like we do? You'll be surprised to know he was rather human. I still say it's weird, really weird."
Later in the evening, as I was sitting beside the fire pit with Pippa, I put my arms around her. I was about to give her a passionate kiss. But who should come barging down the beach towards us as per usual, with exemplary timing, along with a mortified expression on his face? It was no other than Mr. Lockwood. I could see that even his loose jowls on his podgy face were jiggling in indignation, and his icy blue Arctic eyes were firing out killer looks at me. He appeared as thunderous as a bad-tempered, grumpy badger. "Dad! Dad! It's you!" piped Pippa in a surprise, her voice wobbling nervously, her face unable to disguise the guilt, embarrassment, and shame of being caught out like this. "Yes, it's me, Pippa. I'm very glad you recognise your own father." What are you doing here, Dad? I don't understand." "I can see, sweetheart, that there are a lot of misunderstandings here this evening, which is very unfortunate. I don't understand one thing, Pippa. Why you're not staying with Lisa Gosnell as you informed me you were. I phoned them up, and they told me you weren't even there. So I put 2 and 2 together and made 4, and figured out you must be with Lachlan. I mean, after all, where else would you be? I phoned his mother and found out that you were camped out here on a private beach. And what's a father going to think about that? Now, isn't this very cosy? Very, very cosy indeed. A lovely place for a young man with inflamed hormones to take advantage of my innocent daughter. Look, Mr. Lockhart, it's not what you think." "It's not what I think, Lachlan? Are you kidding me? Of course it's what I think. If it wasn't what I'm thinking, why would you sneak behind my back like this? What have you got to hide? Why all the secrecy?" "Because, Dad, you're always in my face, spying on me all the time. It's like you don't trust me. I'm 21, for goodness sake, not a tiny kid that you need to babysit." "It's Lachlan I don't trust. I've seen the way he looks at you, Pippa. I know exactly what he's thinking. No one lays a hand on my daughter until her wedding day," said Mr. Lockhart, growing green at the gills. "No one. Do you hear me, Lachlan? No one." "That's good, Mr. Lockhart. That means we won't have to wait for much longer. We're getting married next week." "We're getting married?" said Pippa, looking at me with a bewildered expression on her face. "We're getting married?" She repeated it as if she couldn't quite comprehend the meaning of the words. "Well, that's if you'll have me." Pippa rushed into my arms, her face glowing with excitement. "Marry you? Of course I'll marry you. I couldn't think of anything I'd rather do. I fell for you in church when you mocked me about my grand entrance. I knew then that you were the one for me." "Turn around," I told her father. "I do hope you will allow me to give your daughter a kiss in the circumstances." Mr. Lockhart's jaw dropped open in astonishment, but there was very definitely a thrilled twinkle in his eyes. "I'm very happy for you both," he said, turning around to walk away. "You have a week to wait, Lachlan, for the very big day, so don't you dare blow it. Keep your hands off my daughter. Until then, as all good things in life are worth waiting for, my daughter is one of those good things. Mr. Lockhart, you haven't told me anything I do not already know. Do you think I would have put up with all your nonsense for so long if I wasn't head over heels in love with your daughter?" "I thought as much," said Mr. Lockhart, laughing. "I'm looking forward to marrying you both next week. We need to get cracking with the arrangements, for I want Pippa to have a fairy tale wedding." And true to his words, we weren't disappointed. With all Mr. Lockhart's contacts, we had a huge wedding that was so magical. It was arranged in a week, what for some people might have taken a year, for every single detail of the wedding was absolutely seamless. And when Pippa walked down the aisle in her white wedding dress, I knew that I was the luckiest man in the entire world. She was breathtakingly beautiful. I've been happily married to Pippa for 10 years now, and we always associate the meeting of a Bigfoot with the day that we got engaged. But one thing I learnt from this quintessential experience is that without a doubt, the very best things in life are worth waiting for. So please don't open the bottle of champagne too early. Wait for the quintessential right moment. It'll be worth your while. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, It happened a long time ago, about 37 years ago to be exact. But even when I think about the event, it most certainly makes my skin crawl, sending unpleasant chills down the spine, as it could so easily have cast my character in a negative, less than favourable light, which would ultimately have had catastrophic consequences on my career. It would seem that the age-old adage that no good deed goes unpunished is very apt in this case. Since I was about 9 years old, I have always known what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted nothing more than to become a sheriff in a small American town. In my early youth, most of the games I played with my younger brother Benjamin were cops and robbers. I invariably assumed the role of the cop, while my brother, along with our friends, became the iniquitous gang of robbers that I arrested. I remember I owned a mesmerising, shimmering sheriff badge, along with a pair of handcuffs and, of course, the quintessential cowboy hat that any sheriff would be proud to have gracing his head. I do recall it gave me a buzz arresting my brother's friends in all our boyhood games. This profound revelation that made me desirous to become a sheriff occurred to me when our next-door neighbour, a very pretty young woman in her early 20s called Abigail Cordell, was beaten black and blue by her goon of a boyfriend on a regular basis. It was not uncommon to see her walking around with a limp in one of her legs or a cast on her forearm from a broken wrist. Of course, she would feign that she had just bumped into a door, but no one was ever fooled, not even for a fleeting second. We lived in a close-knit neighbourhood, where all the bungalows were so close to each other that you could almost hear the neighbour breathe. It was unfortunate that the walls in the houses seemed so paper-thin that even my mother would describe us as pretty much living in a goldfish bowl. So regretfully everybody knew each other's business. To all intents and purposes, privacy was indeed a luxury that we could ill afford, rather like an expensive crocodile bag you could only ever dream of owning. I regret that gossip was rife in our community. Tongues were forever wagging, especially about the young couple living next door to us, who were always being discussed by the locals in every diner, coffee shop and street corner in our local town. Indeed, sometimes we could hear a woman's frantic sobs from the next-door neighbour's house, along with a man's raised, rather gravelly voice that could be heard for miles around. All the houses in our area would become unusually quiet and unnaturally still, almost as if every ear in the neighbourhood was listening in. It didn't take much to deduce that this woman was a victim of domestic violence. Of course, whenever the police were called around to the property by a concerned neighbour, Abigail simply refused to press any charges against her intemperate boyfriend. My mother would always shake her head in despair. Her eyes would mist over with tears. "Poor, poor woman! I wish we could do something to help the poor mite." Even though I was only a boy at the time, I wanted nothing better than to break down the neighbour's front door and punch the lights out of that dreadful, impetuous, hot-headed man who was a Class A, unsavoury, homicidal thug. I remember when my mother was not looking, I would surreptitiously go around to the neighbour's house. I would knock on the door, when I knew, of course, that the young lady's pugnacious boyfriend was definitely out. I always knew when he'd left the premises, because I'd hear his motorbike starting up, whizzing down the street, disappearing down the long ribbon of asphalt, until finally there was a blissful silence, along with a feeling of tranquillity, once, of course, the rabid man had finally left the neighbourhood. I'm sure I wasn't the only person to be heartily relieved to see him go. The bad news was he was always back like an annoying mosquito that never leaves you alone. I was about 9 years old at the time. I remember Abby would open the bright red front door. Her eyes would be black and blue as a result of another vicious assault from her boyfriend. She would look down at me and say, "Yes, can I help you?" I'd hand her a piece of cake that my mother had made. "It's for you. It's chocolate fudge," I told her. "Mum says that ladies love chocolate." "Your mother is very clever. She's right. I love chocolate. This is very sweet of you. So very kind. Would you like to come in for an ice-cold lemonade?" I remember nodding while she led me into her kitchen that was always strewn with pizza and burger boxes, along with copious amounts of crunched-up beer cans. "Does it hurt?" I asked her, looking at her black eye as she watched me drink my icy lemonade. I remember thinking she looked so sad, seemed very glad of my company, for even at the young tender age I could sense the troubled woman was indeed desperately lonely. She had nodded. "Well,
It's a little tender. It hurts a bit, I suppose, but it's not that bad." "Why does he hit you, your boyfriend?" I asked. "We can hear you crying all the time. Why is he so mean to you? My dad is never mean to my mother." "I guess my boyfriend just has a bad temper. He gets upset with me sometimes. I suppose I wind him up the wrong way. Then he just explodes." "That's no excuse. Your boyfriend's bad. If I was big, I'd beat him up for you, so he could never ever hurt you again." I remember she'd laughed. "You are clever, sweet, very kind," she said. "Quite the charmer. What's your name?" "Nicholas Stuart Forbes," I told her. "That's a cool name, Nicholas. What do you want to do when you grow up?" Then it hit me like a blinding revelation, as if a bright light in a dark corner of my mind had uncovered a marvellous hidden golden truth, rather like an old book hiding in a corner covered in cobwebs, that held this big, fabulous, mind-blowing secret that only in the second of time had just suddenly revealed itself to me. "A policeman," I told her proudly. "I want to be a policeman, maybe a sheriff, so I can arrest horrible men like your boyfriend, so he can never ever hurt you again. I would lock him up, never let him out, so that you would be safe and happy forever and ever." "That would be very nice," she said dreamily. "Sometimes I wish someone would lock him up, throw away the key. Yet I do love him, you know, in a twisted way. But he does have a dark side. When he gets angry, he just loses it. My mum thinks you should leave him." "Your mum has a lot of opinions about my relationship, it would seem." "Well, we can hear you arguing all the time. He's very, very loud." "Well, your mother's right, I guess. I should leave him, but I can't. I'm torn between a rock and a hard place, because despite everything, I still love him." I remember being very confused that this pretty girl could love such an odious, obnoxious man, but I was soon to learn that as I grew up, human relationships could be very complicated. Suffice to say, I truly regret that I never knew what actually happened to Abby Cordell, as they moved away from their home next to us, so I never saw her again. I always hoped she came to her senses one day, and finally left that creep, as nobody deserves to live in fear over their partner, walking on landmines every day of their lives, terrified that one day one of them might just explode. Fast forward to when I was about 25 years old. At this quintessential stage of my life, I had a bachelor's degree behind me in criminal law, and was eager to pursue the route of becoming a bona fide, fully fledged sheriff, but it would at first require some practical applications, like becoming an intern in a sheriff's office for a while, to gain some life experience that was invaluable for me. I was mulling over these considerations in my mind while deciding to take a trip to the North Cascades National Park, which is only about 3 hours' drive away from Seattle, where I lived at the time. This North Cascades Park is an exquisite park, long revered for its rugged beauty, alpine meadows, jagged peaks, deep forested valleys, majestic mountain scenery, cascading waterfalls, snowfields, and of course stunning glaciers. Indeed, the national park has only 300 glaciers, which is much more than any United States national park outside of Alaska. It is one of the least visited national parks. I've always preferred to evade the crowds, so the North Cascades Park ticked all the boxes for me. I had firmly decided to take the highway loop leading to Winthrop, from where I chose to enjoy a few hiking trails veering quite a way off the beaten track. One of the things you do have to consider as a potential sheriff or police officer is being physically fit. This was something I took very seriously indeed, so hiking for hours over tumultuous terrain only added to my strength, stamina, and endurance skills. So on this particular occasion, I was eager to pursue a really rather challenging route that was not on any designated hiking trail, that required a great deal of uphill trekking in a remote area of the park. So off I went like a lamb to the slaughter, as unbeknownst to me, this day would be unlike any other, and would leave an indelible blueprint on my life. I do remember it was an exquisite spring morning. The winter was long behind us. The meadows were bursting with colourful blooms. There were alpine flowers in the valley of every colour, in pinks, blues, yellows and whites. There were colourful butterflies darting from one flower to another, along with wild bees frenziedly pollinating all the flowers. It looked so beguiling, so breathtaking, so magnificently beautiful. I decided to take a trek through the wooded, undisturbed area that was rarely frequented by visitors to the park, filled with clusters of Douglas firs, western hemlocks and red cedar trees. There are no words to describe this wooded sanctuary to you. It was absolutely mesmerizing. The tall, graceful, pyramid-shaped trees towered up into the sky like emerald giants, while the dark earthen floor was richly carpeted with viridescent greens, including interesting ground covers from ferns to succulent herbs, salvias, wild strawberries, lilacs, a kaleidoscope of rich indigenous plants, along with several collapsed tree trunks lying across the forest floor, swathed elegantly in luxuriant green mosses, lichens and lots of fungi, many of them clearly edible. Soft shafts of sunlight twinkled through the little openings between the trees, dappling the forest floor in a flattering, gentle light that served to highlight the intense, rich, vibrant greens of this ethereal, shaded sanctuary. As I was walking through the wooded area, I was suddenly struck by how quiet everything was. You see, I've been a hiker all my life. Never have I known the forest to be this silent, as all the cheerful birdsong was absent from the space. So all I could hear were my rubber-soled boots crunching the twigs, leaves and ground covers beneath my feet. I will say that I did find the silence really rather intimidating, disturbing even. I was profoundly bothered by it all. I sensed something was definitely amiss, but what I couldn't even imagine. This anomalous, outlandish feeling certainly set my nerves on edge. I knew all too well the full implications of an area growing quiet often meant that there may be a predator in my midst. But what? A mountain lion? Cougar? A bear? I couldn't be sure. My nerves intensified, while a little voice in my head told me to leave the forest at once and return to the common hiking trail regularly traversed by other hikers. All of a sudden I picked up two distinct voices, one sounding like a little girl, whose musical laughter filled the forest with a joyful resonance, while the other voice sounded distinctly female. I remember thinking, what the heck is someone doing bringing a toddler into a treacherous, precipitous area like this? I mean, even a relatively fit person would have found this route that I'd taken to be arduous and unfriendly. So hearing the rise and fall of a little child's happy chuckling certainly got my attention. I decided to be very discreet. I approached the voices stealthily, rather like a leopard on the prowl, creeping cautiously behind trees and ground covers. I tried my level best to be as quiet as I possibly could, and that was no mean feat, especially with no birdsong around. I was rarely battling to remain still. When the voices got very close, I lowered my body close to the ground and peered through the rambling foliage to see a massive, towering creature holding hands with a little 6-year-old girl. My heart almost jumped into my throat. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. It was a Bigfoot. Until this life-changing revelatory moment, I had relegated this mythical creature to the realms of fanciful fairy tales and elaborated legends that bordered on the insanely bizarre. It's amazing how it hits you hard like a block of ice on the head when you suddenly realize that the world is not all that it seems. I should have been absolutely terrified by this imposing creature, but my concerns were directed towards the little child and not myself. I was pretty much convinced she must have been abducted by the creature. Well, so it seemed at the time. Surely no parent would bring a kid into this treacherous part of the wilderness, or they would need their head examining. I pulled out my binoculars to focus in on the Bigfoot and, of course, the little child. What I saw was incredibly endearing. The Bigfoot was female. I guess you could say she was in the region of 7.5 to 8 foot tall, with a pointed head, overlong arms, and a very athletic, svelte body. I discerned that she was about 500 pounds, maybe more, and she was muscular, with absolutely no fat on her at all. Even her breast tissue lacked any padding, as her breasts were rather like empty pockets, low slung on her chest. Her body was covered in long, flowing golden brown hair
that was silky, luxurious, long. Her face was a very dark brown colour, but not completely black, with a flat aquatic nose, deep-set dark eyes, a furrowed forehead, and a female face that looked remarkably human. The creature was talking intently to the child in an audible language of which I am not acquainted with. The little child appeared to be chuckling, while the Bigfoot female was looking at this child with adoring eyes like a besotted mother. The child seemed hilariously happy, certainly thriving on being the centre of attention, chatting away to the Bigfoot without any inhibitions, as if she was having a tea party with her dolls, of which the Bigfoot was clearly one of the guests. This was a kid that was thoroughly enjoying herself, playing like an imaginary game, of which Bigfoot herself was playing a quintessential part. At one point they were both sharing wild strawberries together. The little girl had red stains over her dress from all the juices. I think the thing that hit me hardest was how she related to that kid so naturally, much better than some mothers I've seen before, who are so often very disconnected, cold and indifferent towards their own children. I really didn't want to interrupt this cosy interaction between a child and a Bigfoot, but I knew that I must. I realised that there was a mother out there, possibly worrying herself half to death about the whereabouts of her little daughter. I didn't feel any fear towards this female Bigfoot whatsoever, even though she was utterly enormous, for I perceived she had a heart, and a big one at that. I had witnessed her remarkable, unlikely connection with this human girl, which had been a pleasure to witness, an indelible, tear-jerking memory on my mind that could never ever be expunged. So I just made my appearance known. The female Bigfoot, on seeing me, tightened. Her whole body stiffened. Her dark eyes grew wide with terror, scanning me quickly. I realised she was looking at me to see if I was carrying a weapon of any kind. She reluctantly pushed the little girl towards me. Then she turned around, gliding away into the depths of the forest, and was gone from sight. I was struck by how graceful her movements were. When the female Bigfoot left, the small child began to become very distressed. She didn't like the fact that her friend had gone and that she was stuck with me. She made that clear when she began to sob. Eventually I managed to calm her down, carrying her a long way in my arms down a long trail towards the nearest campground, where my truck was also fortunately parked. I was looking for a park ranger when very suddenly a large, well-upholstered woman came bolting towards me. She grabbed the child from my arms with a look of extreme indignation on her face. Cradling her child in her arms, she cried, "Gretchen! Gretchen! Are you all right? Did this man take you?" He took me away from my tea party." "I knew it," said the woman. "I knew it." She began slapping me hard on the face with her cold hands. Her hazel eyes were like daggers. She began to scream blue murder at me. "You nasty, nasty man! You abducted my kid! How dare you! Perverts like you want locking up!" She grabbed her daughter protectively, looking at me with enraged, furious eyes. "Everyone is out there looking for my daughter. You stole her away. She's been missing for 1.5 hours now. How could you? I've been beside myself with worry. If my husband was here, he'd kill you himself." "Calm down, madam. Calm down. I'd like to explain. You've got it all wrong. You've got the wrong end of the stick. I didn't abduct your daughter. I was the one that discovered her in the woods, way off the hiking trail. I decided to bring her back here, in case anyone knew who she belonged to. I thought better of telling her about the Bigfoot. I knew that that would make me seem less credible." "Gretchen, did this man take you from the campground? He did, didn't he? He took you." Gretchen nodded. "Mammy took me away from my tea party." "I'm going to call the park ranger. You need locking up. You and men like you. You make my stomach turn." "I'm not going to listen to this, madam. You're completely off your head. Use your brains, woman. If I was abducting your daughter, I think I'd hardly be carrying her out in broad daylight into your campground, would I? If my intentions were to abduct her, would I have not been a little bit more discreet, don't you think?" "You knew everyone was looking for my daughter. You knew it. And you thought you'd sneak this way and no one would see you, but you got caught out. That's what happened." Thoughts of my career as a sheriff went flying through the window, like wisps of smoke up a chimney, creating in my mind wavering clouds of uncertainty and doubt. Supposing this woman managed to convince the ranger, or even law enforcement, that I was a person of possible interest in the mysterious short disappearance of her daughter, it wouldn't bode well for my career, as even if there was a lingering questionable doubt over my character, I could kiss goodbye to a career in the force or ever becoming a sheriff. So I just hightailed it out of the place as fast as I could, with the woman screaming obscenities after me. "I'll get you! I'll get you! Just you wait!" She really was rather unhinged. I don't blame her for panicking about her daughter vanishing like that, but to blatantly accuse me of abducting her daughter without hearing me out was nonsensical, ludicrous, and absolutely ridiculous. I dived into my truck, jumped onto the seat, slammed the car door behind me, revved up the engine, and drove all the way back to Seattle, feeling incredibly rattled, drained, and exceedingly upset about what had just transpired. I realised my actions might have made me look guilty, but really I didn't want to hang around being interrogated by the park ranger, and goodness knows who else, and also having to plead my innocence. It was possible that they would believe my account and realise the woman was as nutty as a fruitcake, but I didn't want to hang around to find out or take any chances. I'd come to the park, for goodness sake, to have a pleasant hike. The fact that I'd stumbled across a young child with a Bigfoot was hardly my fault. I remember phoning my father to tell him exactly what happened. "You saw a Bigfoot?" he piped. "You saw a Bigfoot?" "Yes, Dad, I saw a Bigfoot." "You saw a Bigfoot?" "Dad, I told you, I saw a Bigfoot." "Sorry, son. I'm trying to process what you're saying. Are you sure? Could you not have been mistaken?" "I saw a Bigfoot, Dad." "So the Bigfoot was playing with a little girl in the woods, and you brought her back to the campsite, and an unreasonable woman accused you of abducting her child. I've never heard anything so insanely ridiculous." My father started laughing. "What was she smoking, son?" "Dad, I'm being serious. This isn't funny. I was worried this event would jeopardize my career in becoming a sheriff." "Son, I don't mean to laugh, but it is very funny. You are squeaky clean. No one would believe in a month of Sundays you were capable of abducting a child. I can assure you of that." "Well, don't you think I made myself look guilty, Dad, running off like that?" "I'd have run away too if I was wearing your shoes, confronted by a loathsome, ignoramus woman like that. What an appalling woman! For goodness sake, you rescued her daughter. She falsely accuses you of abducting the child. The saying, 'no good deed goes unpunished,' springs to mind here. Just forget about the whole thing, son. Get on with your life. Put it behind you. Forget about it. I would if I was in your shoes." Fast forward about 5 years. At the time I was an intern to a sheriff in a small town. The job of an intern in a sheriff's office can be tediously dull, doing low-level clerical administrative work, sorting out files, answering phones, you know, that sort of stuff. The sheriff I worked with was a man who saw me as having the quintessential traits to become a town sheriff in the future, and he was desirous for me to fill his shoes one day. But as sheriffs are often elected, he decided to take me out with him on many of his duties, so that I became acquainted with the locals, as he wanted to introduce them to me, so that the chances of my being elected as sheriff in the future would become increasingly likely. We soon became firm friends. I told him about my experience in the national park with the Bigfoot, and about the appalling woman that had practically accused me of abducting her child, which the sheriff, much like my father, found terribly amusing. Of course, he thought I was the last person he could ever envisage abducting a child. Much like my father, he only ever saw the funny side of the story. "Poor child," he said. "No wonder she had a tantrum when you took her back to her mother. She would have sooner stayed with the Bigfoot. Honestly, I don't think I can blame her." "You know," I said, "I think that might just be true." At that, we both laughed. One day I was shopping for groceries in the small town, putting items in my trolley. I could see this large woman looking at me, who seemed strangely familiar, although I couldn't perceive where I'd seen her before. This rude, obtrusive woman continued to stare at me fixedly. She was exceedingly obnoxious. Then she shouted at the top of her lungs, as if I'd assaulted her in the middle of the street. "It's you! It's you! You're the horrible man that abducted my little girl 5 years ago at the Cascades Park in Washington. I knew it was you the moment I saw you. I never forget a face. You haven't changed at all. I knew you were guilty, especially after you ran off like that." All of a sudden I recognised the woman. My heart jumped in my throat. I felt as if all the air had been sucked and drained out of my lungs. I felt as if I was about to hyperventilate from seeing this terrifying, loud, abrasive, uncouth woman all over again. Could it get worse than this? I composed myself, took a deep breath and said, "You get me wrong, madam. I didn't run away because I was guilty, but because you were throwing all kinds of false allegations at me that were not true. I was the one that rescued your little daughter. But did I get any thanks from you? No. On the contrary, you jumped to all kinds of crazy, outlandish conclusions. Most women would have been over the moon to have their daughter back, given the benefit of the doubt to me. But not you. I wasn't going to stick around to have my character assassinated like that, nor my name dragged through the mud. Are you crazy?" "Is everything all right here?" asked the security guard, realising that 2 people in the store were having an altercation, while nosy customers were surreptitiously pretending to shop for items close by, sneakily glancing over their shoulders while acting as if they were reading the ingredients in a box of cereal that had suddenly become incredibly fascinating. Curiosity was intensified, as many of the shoppers were well acquainted with me through the sheriff. "Does everything look all right?" "No, everything is not all right, as it happens," said the woman, waggling her accusatory finger at me like a dagger. "This man here, he abducted my child from the national park 5 years ago. You must arrest him now." "Madam, I cannot arrest this man. I know nothing about the incident of which you speak, but you cannot go randomly accusing someone in the store of something without any proof. We sell groceries here, madam. We're not involved in high-end police investigations. If you have any issues, you need to take them up yourself with the sheriff. People are here shopping, madam. I would kindly appreciate if you lowered the tone of your voice and did not cause a scene or commotion, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store." "How dare you?" said the seething woman, turning her wrath on the security officer and oscillating her arms around furiously like a frenzied octopus. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like this? Why are you standing up for a child abductor? That's what I want to know. It leaves me questioning your integrity. If you want proof, I have proof. I don't forget a face. It's him. I know it's him. He abducted my child. You must call the sheriff at once." By this time, many of the shoppers in the store were not even pretending to shop anymore. They had gathered around us in a large semicircle, watching the scene unfold before them, with such astonishment that their mouths were quite literally hanging open. I think all they needed to do was order some popcorn, dim the lights, then they would have enjoyed the movie. I could only imagine what they would have said when they got home to their families. They were probably gossiping about our altercation for weeks afterwards, because, believe me, it was a scene that would make Universal Studios seriously intimidated. "You want me to call the sheriff, do you?" I asked. "I'll do that for you, before you have any more kittens." "Right, you do that," she said. "You call the sheriff." When the sheriff arrived, the woman began her accusations all over again. Only she raised her voice so loudly that everyone in the store was informed that I had abducted her child in a national park. "Madam, you need to be exceedingly careful when you lay false, slanderous, defamatory accusations at people," said the sheriff. "I want to assure you, madam, that this man you are pointing a finger at is likely to fill my shoes one day and become our town sheriff. Let me assure you, madam, that he is not a person that would ever abduct a child. Believe me, I know. In fact, I was well informed about this bizarre story.
how my colleague rescued your child from a benevolent female Bigfoot. He then brought her to the campground looking for a ranger. You pounced on him, accusing him of abducting your daughter, but he was the person that rescued your child. I think you owe my intern a very big apology, don't you?"
This time the woman looked astonished.
You say my daughter was snatched by a Bigfoot?" "That is what happened," I told her. "Your daughter loved the Bigfoot. She wasn't happy with me retrieving her from the forest. I figured out there had to be an upset mother who was looking for her child, which was why I returned her to the campground. No wonder my daughter kept talking about a nice bear lady after the abduction. It makes so much sense now." "You owe the man an apology," came a woman's voice. "You should be ashamed of yourself, accusing that man. He's a hero. He's not an abductor." Everyone started clapping, and the woman, who was now so humiliated, said, "I'm sorry, but you didn't explain yourself well." "You didn't give the man a chance," said one of the shoppers. "Believe me, lady, if I'd been in his shoes, I'd also have run a mile from you. Honestly, what the heck is your problem?" I'm glad to say I never heard from that woman ever again, but I was to discover that her presence in our small town had been as random as the rain on a sunny day. She had been visiting her sister for a couple of days, who lived in the town, and so happened to be buying a few groceries when she happened to notice me. I ask you, what were the chances of that ever happening? Which goes to show you that it's a very small world indeed. I'm glad to say I did end up becoming the town sheriff. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.